TrekProfiles Podcast, episode 33, recorded winter 2019 to 2020. This is the Trek Profiles Podcast, where each episode we sit down with a Star Trek fan, we learn their story, and we try to figure out why we all love the show so much. I'm John, your intrepid host of this whole enterprise, and I welcome you to this, the Trek Profiles Podcast, episode 33. If you wish to get in touch with us, you can reach us at feedback@trekprofiles.com or on Facebook or Twitter at TrekProfiles. Warning, as we record this, we are in the middle of Star Trek Picard Season 1, so all previous Trek content up to and including that point is fair game and may be discussed during this episode. You have been warned, human. As always, my co-host is the solidly serious, solemnly silly, yet ceaselessly sensible M5 Multitronic unit.
The M5 is operational.
M5, let's do the news and announcements.
M5 working.
Well, I want to welcome all of you to part 2 of 3 of The Secret Plan. I hope you all enjoyed part 1, and I was eager to get part 2 out as soon as I could. In this series, for those who don't know, I invited former guests back on the show to come back and interview me about parts of Star Trek that I found the most enjoyable or the most meaningful and that sort of thing. In part 1, I talked to Bill Smith about my Star Trek history. Jen Tift interviewed me about the Galileo 7 from TOS. Trek Book Club's Rob Chapman and I talked about the novel The Final Reflection, and then Heather Kirby and I geeked out over the motion picture, and then of course Duncan Barrett and I had a great discussion about Carbon Creek from Enterprise. So if you haven't heard part 1, I would strongly recommend going out and checking out that one first. But in this one, we'll have more alumni of the show come back to interview me about more Star Trek episodes. No Kobayashi Maru lightning round results or questions this time, but I can tell you that I'll have a guest on part 3 who will test me against the Kobayashi Maru, so stand by for that. I got some feedback from a few of you about the length of the Extravaganza episodes, and my response is that while these are longer episodes than normal, you can listen to just one segment at a time. And if all goes according to plan, I'm going to try to put chapter markers into this one. So depending on how you're listening to this, and if your player supports it, you can jump right around to the chapters. So that should make it a little bit easier to start and stop. Please do feel free to let me know how it goes and if you like that feature. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to subscribe via your preferred podcasting platform. And as is customary on the show, there are some lightly edited outtakes and bonus material at the end of this episode. They will come after the ending audio cards. Enjoy them, or not, as you choose. So that's it for the news and weather. Now it's time for our first segment. In this one, we're going to have Dan Davidson, one of the overlords over there on Trek Geeks, to interview me about one of my favorite Star Trek novels. Dan was on episode 6 of the podcast, and I don't think anyone who heard that one could ever forget the story of how Dan was in the depths of a pretty serious depression and how Star Trek literally saved his life. It was a very special episode of Trek Profiles, and if you haven't heard it, I would heartily suggest checking it out. So with that having been said, M5, roll it.
Playing interview.
Greetings, everyone. My name is Dan Davidson of the Trek Geeks podcast and Discovering Trek, and I have the honor and privilege of being your guest host for this special discussion with Mr. John Krikorian. It's not often that I get to talk about my passions with Star Trek, and what I mean by that is the amazing novels that have come out over the years. I just love reading, love talking about it, so this is special for me. And today, we're going to talk about one of my all-time favorite novels with John, and that is Yesterday's Sun by Anne Crispin. Fantastic book. John, thank you for inviting me here. I'm so happy to be here and talk about this with you.
Well, you know, Dan, it's a thrill for me, and I'm sure this is going to come up in some of the other interviews if it hasn't already, but this was my chance to get people back on the show, because the way that the show is structured, it's not the kind of podcast where you get to have people come back and weigh in on episodes or anything like that, because I don't really do sort of the topical stuff or cover rewatches or anything. It's sort of a one and done type deal. So I was thinking about things I might do for the anniversary, and that's when I said, man, if I have people on and we have opposite day on Trek Profiles, I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and my listeners can get the chance to experience some of the alumni of the program and get y'all back on. So it's a treat for me, Dan.
Well, I feel honored to be an alumni. I had a great time when I was on with you last year. And Trek Profiles is literally one of the top in my list. I just love listening to it all the time. And I got to say, your latest episode with Marina Kravchuk was just fantastic. She's awesome. She's a great friend. It was wonderful to have her on your show to discuss her fandom. So congratulations on another successful show. It was great.
Oh, thank you. And I feel like we should pronounce her name correctly. Kravchuk.
Yes, and got the best accent in the world, too. So hi to her and to all the other people that you've had on the show. It's been a great success, so congratulations.
Thanks, Dan.
So let's get right into Yesterday's Sun. Great novel. For those who haven't read it yet, I'm going to give a brief synopsis about it right now. So spoiler alert, if you haven't read it yet. It's a direct sequel to the TOS Season 3 episode All Our Yesterdays, in which part of the story shows Spock and McCoy traveling 5,000 years into the past of planet Sarpedon, where Spock falls in love with a woman who is trapped in that past. Spock and McCoy are able to return to their present, but the woman Zarabeth must stay behind. So this book is a sequel to that episode. The book is about the son that Zarabeth had as a result of that relationship with Spock. His name is Zar. Apparently, a curious crew member found some historical cave drawings from Sarpedon that looked strangely Vulcan. So Kirk, Spock, and McCoy use my favorite technology/life form, the Guardian of Forever. They travel back to the past and bring Zar back to their time with them. But it's not all unicorns and rainbows for father and son, and while family issues start to come forth with the two, the Enterprise must deal with a possible invasion of Romulans on planet Gateway, which is the home of the Guardian of Forever. So that's kind of a brief synopsis about the novel. There's a lot in this book, man. There's a lot going on, a lot of things we're not used to seeing with Spock. It's one of the best. It's one of the classics. And I think we talked about me coming on a while back and talking about it, and I had not read it in quite a while. But as we got closer to this date to record, I said, you know what? I got to read it again. So over the course of the last week, I read it again. So it's all fresh in my mind, and I'm ready to talk about whatever you want to talk about it because it's just a great read.
Well, it is. And, it's really stunning to me as I was doing some of the research for this, because there's some things that, but you don't really know that you know. And I realized how early this was. I mean, this was only the 11th or 10th book that had come out, and, the Star Trek novels, and how Ann Christman just managed to hit it so far out of the park so early on in the novels, with this book was really just incredible, because it really does fit absolutely perfectly into All Our Yesterdays without any, oh, no, this thing really didn't happen in All Our Yesterdays, or, oh, no, you misunderstood what you saw on screen. There's none of that. It's like we take everything on screen, we treat it as authentic. It really happened. There's no quote unquote retcons or anything like that. And it just tells this amazing story of what comes after. And it's, first of all, a rip-roaring story.
It is.
Right? You've got some great just action stuff. You've got, sort of the tactics of the land battle as they're fighting these Romulans. You've got space battle stuff with Scotty in command. And I love Scotty. And just seeing him commanding the Enterprise, taking on this Romulan fleet was amazing. You've got, I think is it Commodore Wesley? Isn't it still? Right?
The Lexington is back.
Yeah, the Lexington's in there, and they're fighting the Romulans together. I knew it was another Starfleet guy that we'd known. I just didn't remember who it was off the top of my head. But, there's just great space battle stuff. And then you have layered into that this incredible father-son story between Spock and Zar that I got to say, as a boy of 12, I think, when I first read this, because I know I read it when it first came out. And I remembered that I just connected with that story. And I really, really understood something about my own relationship with my father from reading the story in a Star Trek book. And that's why I this book was never far from my thoughts. Whenever anyone said Star Trek novel, this is always one of the ones I think of.
It's funny that you say that, because one of the first things I was going to ask you about Yesterday's Sun is we both agree that it's a great book. It's got a lot of great story to it. Is there something very personally meaningful to you regarding the story which makes it one of your favorites, or is it just that it's just that good of a read?
Well, it is just that good of a read, and I would, without reservation, recommend it to anybody who enjoys TOS stories at all to go read. But I think the thing that's so amazing about it is that if someone was to say to me, okay, so all I have to do is watch All Our Yesterdays before reading the book, I would say no. I would say, no, that's wrong. You should watch All Our Yesterdays, definitely, because first of all, Mariette Hartley, who is wonderfully talented and stunning and just amazing in the episode, and it's important to understand what happens in the book. But you should also watch Journey to Babel, because you have to see how Sarek treats Spock.
Right.
And refresh your memory about that relationship just from what you see in TOS. Because remember, this book came out in the 80s, right? We didn't have any of this, Discovery, Sarek, and all. None of that existed, right? We're just looking at like TOS era type stuff. And when you look at that, and then you see how Spock treats Zar, you realize that the cycle is perpetuating.
Exactly.
And he is, without... Well, no, we're going to have to spoil it. I mean, he's awful.
He's terrible.
He is literally the worst possible dad in doing the worst possible things to his kid. And I don't mean like in an abusive way, but just like sort of how Sarek was terrible to Spock. He's doing the same types of things in a different flavor, I would say, to Zar. And you're like, what is happening, Spock? Yeah. It's not supposed to be like this.
I think he actually is worse in many aspects in the way he treats Zar. He treats Zar like he's not even... I mean, he's definitely his son, but it's like he doesn't even take that into consideration. He's nothing but a student. He needs to learn, and he treats him worse than he would another student because of that bond. And one of the things that I found interesting in this read was you find out a lot about how Vulcans feel about family. You never really got that message before about how important it is and whether this was going to be a huge embarrassment to the Sarek family because Spock had a child with this woman who was, the child is too old to be Spock's son, which is a very confusing point in itself. But you have to wonder, was Spock that way because of what he felt was going to happen if his family found out about what Zar was?
Yeah, and there's this incredible scene in the book where he has to go to everyone's favorite senior Vulcan, T'Pau,
yes,
right, to get permission to use the Guardian of Forever, to travel back in time, to rescue Zar. And he has to explain to her basically what this is all about, right? Because she's like, I'm not going to go to the Federation Council, dude, just because you asked me to. You got to, lay it all out on the table. She says in her very stoic Vulcan way. And he does. And, first of all, you got to realize, like, what a shame he must feel at trying to explain all this, right? That he
and she actually calls him out. She says, "You're here at Vulcan, but you're not going to see your family. What's going on?" Because he doesn't want to tell his family about it. I mean, he's in a very bad situation, and a very tough situation, I should say. And one of the things I found interesting throughout the story is Ann Crispin told us in ways that we haven't seen before, emotion in Spock that we aren't used to. Balling of his fists, hooded eyebrows, voice raising, stuff like that. And like you said, back in the 80s when these novels were out, that's not something that we were used to seeing with Spock unless he was under the spores or something like that. So it was very interesting to see the conflict that he was dealing with inside.
Oh, absolutely. And we always knew that Vulcans had emotions. I mean, we saw that from Mr. Spock back in TOS on screen. It's just that it was always tightly controlled, tightly regulated, and he had sort of this mental process, that was very mathematical, that sort of kept everything in check. And if there was anything that was going to challenge his ability to control his emotions, it would be this, the fact that he has a child he did not even know about. And I mean, one thing we should say is that he didn't even intend to bring back the adult child. There was a mistake in the calculations. I can't remember exactly how it was. You read the book more recently than I did, but they overshot the period where they'd intended to go. Right. And he intended to bring back Zar as a child.
Exactly. They thought they were going to find him when he was like 6 or 7, and they found him when he was like 21 or late teens,
28,
something like that.
I believe. 28, yeah. And even worse than that, Zarabeth had passed.
Right.
At that point. So they find Zar living by himself in the frozen tundra
exactly.
in the ancient past of Sarpedon, which was really just tragic.
One of the things I wanted to ask you is we're talking about how great it ties to All Our Yesterdays, and it does such a magnificent job of doing that. One of the things that I've liked about the Star Trek novels in many of them, and there are hundreds of them, and I haven't read all of them, but I've read a lot. I always find myself really liking the ones that are a sequel or an offshoot of an episode. I think the reason I like it so much is because it's something that I can really picture in my mind really well, and I like to see that continuing story, and this is one of the best ones that does it. There's another one that I really love, which is a sequel to What a Little Girl's Made Of, actually.
Really?
Which is very, very good. Came out around the same time, but this one really, really gets to the essence of what All Our Yesterdays was like with Spock and turning back into the Vulcan of 5,000 years ago. And it's just one that you could, it's a short read also, which is good. So you can read it quickly and then you want to read it again.
Yeah, because it's jam-packed. I mean, It's a very dense book and with a lot of story and a lot of concept, and there's a lot of stuff that's unspoken, which I think is really quite good. She does a good job of showing and not telling, right? Which is sort of a trope, but she's really good at that. And I think there's this one scene that really encapsulates that for me, which is that Spock brings Zar aboard the Enterprise, and he basically assumes the role of Zar's teacher. And he tells people that they're related, and people would say, well, how are you related? And Spock tells a sort of Vulcan lie. He says, family relationships on Vulcan are complicated. Which doesn't mean he's your son, dude, but he won't acknowledge him, right? And which is unbelievably terrible, right? Considering the Sarek relationship. And at one point, all the other crewmen on the ship are sitting around in the crew's mess. Scotty, Dr. McCoy. Yeah, you know the scene I'm talking about. So for the benefit of the listeners who haven't read it, Scotty and Dr. McCoy and some of the other TOS favorites are sitting around in the crew's mess or the rec hall. I don't remember which it is now. And Zar is sitting with them having a normal conversation, having a polite conversation. It's all very good. It's fine. Mr. Spock walks in, gets his lunch, sits down, and without any interrogatories or questions at all, immediately just starts shooting questions at Zar. Please describe the four-dimensional end space of a trifold warp manifold. You did not give the math. And literally just starts asking him questions in the middle of like this dinner with all these other people sitting around. And Zar is doing his best to answer, and he does give some answers based on what he's been able to study that Spock's been giving him. And then Mr. Spock is critiquing him publicly in front of everyone. Your answer lacks detail in the following areas: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You did cover section A correctly, but you did not cover sections B or C. Therefore, the answer is incomplete. And he just goes on and on and on. And like everyone is embarrassed. Everyone, like Scotty is embarrassed. Dr. McCoy's embarrassed. And Spock has no perception or care. I wasn't sure in the book. I don't know if he could perceive it or if he just didn't care. I suspect he didn't care or have awareness. And he just continues with this whole thing. And Zar, who was trying to emulate Spock, finally just looks at his dad, puts his eyebrow up and says, fascinating. And everyone realizes that he's basically making fun of his dad. And he goes and he gets a giant meat-filled cheesesteak and sits down and starts tearing into the thing, and Spock is just like stunned, like, what is happening right now, And as I'm reading this, I was 12 and I had a very fraught relationship with my dad. And I was reading this and I actually gained insight a little bit, I think, into my own dynamics with my pop. Because what's interesting is my parents are much, much older. They had me very late in life. Mm-hmm. And my parents were actually married for over 20 years before I came along. Okay. So the people on my row in the family tree, their kids are usually older than me by a lot. All my cousins are long retired, right? Mm-hmm. And my dad is older than I am now when I was born. Yeah. So when I say it was a different generation, it was a way different generation. Yeah. My dad was born in 1920.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, and he was almost 50 when I was born. So what had happened was he had a very different perception of what being a kid was like in like 1980s New York, because he was thinking back to when he was growing up in the 20s and 30s as a street kid, because he was a poor street kid. And he got drafted in the Army, fought in World War II, and then he worked in a grocery store, right? Yeah. And he was always afraid that I was out doing whatever he was doing when he was my age, which was like, I would like go to the hobby store for like 6 hours. He's like, where were you? I was at the hobby store. Yeah, you were. Where were you really? like he would never believe that I was in the hobby store looking at plastic model kits for 6 hours, right? I mean, it was crazy stuff like that.
One of the things, and that was a great story, by the way. I love that. It's interesting to get that type of viewpoint from the different years. My dad was born in 1939, so still that's almost 20 years. So that is quite a difference. One of the things that I did find interesting about the read, with all of the way that Spock was treating him more like a student than anything else, you did see these fatherly things come through from time to time. When Kirk was going to violate, was it General Order 9 by having a civilian in a battle zone, by having Zar go down to Gateway to help with the Romulans, Spock was very adamant that he did not want that to happen because he didn't want his son in danger. He wouldn't say it that way, but that's how he felt. But the thing that struck me most in the story was at the very end, when Zar decided that he needed to go back to Sarpedon in the past. He went through the gateway, and Spock and Kirk could see him through the portal. Spock started to work toward it, like he was going to go be with him, so he wasn't going to be alone. That was a defining moment for the character of Spock, I think, in that all of this time he was trying to pretend it wasn't happening, but it was, and he cares for his son, and he wanted to be there to help him. I thought that was great.
Oh, I thought it was marvelous. And we should explain the backdrop of this. I mean, the reason that they wanted to put Zar, the civilian, into this situation is because they had to protect the Guardian of Forever from the Romulans. The Romulans didn't know what the Guardian was or what was on the planet. They just knew that there was a tremendous Federation asset of some kind on the planet. And Zar has this incredible psychic powers. He has he has like different kinds of mental powers than normal Vulcans. Like he could actually sense where people were, and he could make them feel fear, and
kill them.
Yeah, or kill them. I mean, he had some really intense powers that Spock didn't have, and was really quite in awe of when he saw him demonstrate these. And so because it was like at the highest level of Federation priorities that, look, under no circumstances can we allow this thing to fall under Romulan control. They're like, look, Zar can help us. He can sense where these Romulans are because they're behind a cloaking shield on the planet, so we can't see them. He can sense where they are. That's what I'm saying is like the story is so perfectly constructed that, there's no plot holes. There's no things you kind of have to overlook. Everything has a purpose and a reason. It's tight. It fits together. And it's really just wonderful. And you get this Zar character who, literally was living by himself with no one but his mother, and then she had passed years before. So he's living by himself in this frozen wasteland, doing nothing but hunting animals, right? With no one to talk to, no entertainment, no nothing, right? Just surviving. And he gets to go into the Star Trek future. And he says no.
Yeah, he wants to go back, and one other thing to point out that we were discussing about Gateway is Kirk, only 20 or so people in the entire Federation know of the Guardian of Forever, including the 5 or 6 from City on the Edge of Forever. So only the highest members of the Federation know about it. Kirk was going to destroy the planet if he needed to in order to keep the Guardian out of the Romulans' hands. That's a pretty intense move. He brought up an interesting point. Would the Guardian have some kind of defense to prevent that from happening? We didn't get to see if that was the case or not. But what I like, one of the things that you just pointed out, what I liked is at the end of the story, they were concerned whether or not Zar had gotten back and was okay. And some of the additional cave drawings that were shown at the very end of the story in the last paragraph, there was a picture that Zar had drawn, which was kind of a doodle of the Enterprise. You had the nacelles with the saucer in between the live long and prosper symbol with his hand. So that was a very nice wrap up to the story that he made it back, he was safe, and he lived his life.
But what I thought was even more amazing of the whole thing is that he doesn't go back to the tundra.
Right. He goes to the south.
Yeah, he goes back to like a more temperate part of the planet where like the society that we eventually see, with Mr. Ataz, at the very end in All Our Yesterdays, right? Where like they've invented the Atavachron. They have all this incredible technology. He goes back in time to when basically they were just people living in huts. And he says, I'm going to be the catalyst that's going to bring them civilization, right? I'm going to teach them how to smelt and how to make bronze and, how to do art and how to do all these great things. And he was really the one that really jump-started Sarpedon civilization and gave them the time that they had.
Right.
To live on that planet, which was just remarkable, that he said, I'm going to do this. And it just was a very touching story to me. I mean, how could you not fail to be touched by the story of this young kid who basically gets the chance to have a normal life in a wonderful short time. Yeah. Yep. And after living the life that he's had and rejects it.
And what's great is not only did we get this fantastic sequel to All Our Yesterdays, but there is a sequel to this book, Yesterday's Son, called Time for Yesterday, where we find out what happened with Tsar when he went back. And I don't want to give anything away, and I really can't because I haven't read it in so long. I remember the general idea of it, but
way to narc on yourself
something
there, Dan.
that you would expect. That's for another time.
Yeah, no problem. But I think that especially as a 12-year-old boy, when I read the book, I think that the themes between Spock and Tsar really just got me.
Yeah.
And I just thought this was a novel that helped me understand my own life a little bit better and helped me give my dad a pass
and
on a lot of things.
How many times have we thanked Star Trek for doing something like that, John? I mean, where it's really meant something. It's helped us in our lives. It's really made us understand something that we may not have understood as much before, and it makes us appreciate things a lot more. Like with what you just said with your dad, and along my life, I've had several things that Star Trek has helped me with. So it's just another reason why we're so happy that we have this universe that we can enjoy watching and enjoy reading for those that enjoy reading novels, because this is as good as it gets.
Absolutely. And, at the time that I read this, it really helped me put to bed this, not conflict, but like this like internal disquiet that I'd had. Because when I was 9 or 10, I was growing up in this very ethnic neighborhood, right? And the neighborhood was like half Italian Roman Catholic, half Jewish. And I was neither of those things. So I didn't have a group. So there was me and a couple other like little misfit toys. And, it was how middle school kids are, and kids at that age, right? You end up on the short end of the stick. So you end up getting bullied terribly, right? It's normal. It happens. But what happened was it started to get physical at a certain point, right?
Oh.
Yeah. And so I never said anything about it. And there was this, the janitor at the school is this kindly old guy named Victor. He would always let me hang out in the stairwell well past the time I was supposed to leave the school so that I could kind of sneak out and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And what had happened was eventually my mom and dad found out. And my dad like sprang into action. Like this is exactly the kind of thing, because he grew up on the streets and he was a tough guy and he knew exactly what to do. So he's like, look, I'm going to tell you what to do. He says, you go up to the first kid that tries that and you punch him right in his mouth. And then you get on top of him and you keep punching him in the mouth like 3-4 times. Then you get up and you go across the street, you buy him a Frankfurter and you buy him a Coke and you'll be friends for life. And I was like, Dad, that is not going to happen. He's like, no, this is going to happen. You're going to do this tomorrow. And I was like, Dad, this is not going to happen. He's like, you will do this thing tomorrow. I will be there and your mother will be there. Can you believe this?
Wow.
I was 9 or 10 when this happened, right? And as a kid, this was like one of the most traumatic things that I'd ever experienced. Right. I mean, this was unbelievable. I still think about this like almost every day. And when I had read this book when I was 12, it helped me understand how fathers and sons, even though they love each other, they have just very different perspectives on things.
Right.
So it gave me a very profound understanding of, my dad grew up at a different time.
Yeah.
And it was a good lesson for me to learn at a young age that he didn't know how things were where I was, but he was trying his best. And so I can't say I blame him for that and for putting me through that. But I can say that Star Trek actually helped me.
It has helped so many. It's funny. I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but when you were telling me that story, all I could picture was you as Ralphie from A Christmas Story beating up Scott Farkas in the alleyway. I don't know if that happened, but that's all that popped into my head.
It's a strange thing, but like I will say this is that after that, there was no more of any of the bullying.
There you go.
All of that had stopped, and I can't say that we were friends. I can't say we ever hung out together or were even close, but I can say that it did have a measurable change in how I was treated at school.
That's good. Well, I guess that's a good thing.
Yeah. Hey, so I'll give my dad a pass for that.
Let's talk about one more thing as we wrap up the discussion on Yesterday's Son. It's
Sure.
something that I love. I've always wished we'd seen more of. We only got to see it once, and that's the Guardian of Forever. What a great thing to bring into a story. It's such a mysterious thing. Any story that Star Trek has written that has the Guardian of Forever as part of it is a phenomenal story. This is one, and the other one that I would point out is Imzadi by Peter David, which is a phenomenal story. It used to be my all-time favorite novel for years and years. It's such a great piece of science fiction to be able to bring into a story. And I love that they did it here. It's still got the mystery, but it's still also got the ability to help the crew when they need it, like we saw in City on the Edge of Forever.
Oh, absolutely. It really is marvelous. And I love that the story treated it with the respect that it deserves. It wasn't like a case of Kirk sort of being Kirk and like saying, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go to Planet Gateway and we're going to go down there and we're going to go through the Guardian. No, it's like, no, I have to get 17 layers of approval. I got to go to the Federation Council. And even then there's like scientists on the planet and we had to talk to them. And, it was a whole rigmarole to make this happen. And it made sense. It was very respectful of sort of the world that they created in Star Trek and of the previous story that they told in TOS, which is one of the reasons I liked it so much.
Sure. I think what's great about it is it, in this novel, of course, it was shortly after the series had wrapped up, but it had that mystery. You had to ask it a question in order for it to respond. But one of the things that I loved most about the story and the characters are, you talked about the powers that he had, his psychic ability, his ability to project emotion and feel emotion. He was able to communicate with the Guardian without talking to it at the end. He didn't say anything to the Guardian. He just put his hand on it, and Sarpedon came up at the exact moment that he wanted to go to. Not like they had to go through the whole history and then find the right moment on the tricorder like they had in the beginning of this book and in City on the Edge of Forever. So very interesting dynamic with what Zar was able to do with the Guardian.
There's only one other moment in the book that we didn't talk about that sticks out to me, Dan, and I just want to see if it had the same impact on you. And it's the moment when back in the frozen wasteland, the first time when they go to rescue Zar, where Spock actually asked to see where Zarabeth's remains are.
Yes.
Oh, and he goes down there and basically he cremates her with his phaser.
Yeah.
And I just remembered reading that and realizing he really did love her in his Vulcan way. I mean, I think it's very implicit. If you watch the episode, I think it's very implicit that they had sex during a commercial break, like the way that the episode is structured. It's it's very obvious. Yep. But it was more than that. He really did feel something for Zarabeth, and the emotion of that came back to him, because if I remember it right, he's down there alone.
In the book?
Yeah,
actually, what happens in the book is Zar takes Kirk and McCoy down to where she is. She's in this she's in this like ice cave.
Yeah.
And it's very blue, and there's light coming from the top, like right on the pedestal where she's laying. She looks just like she did when she was alive because it's cold, so she's preserved. And Kirk is actually going to phaser her and is saying a speech, and Spock walks in and stops him, and he does it himself. So they're all there when it happens, but he stopped Kirk from doing it. He felt it was his place to do it. So, and you're right. The emotional, you can feel the weight of emotion in that scene. It's one that I'd like to see on screen, but you can picture it in your mind, and it's very, very nice.
Well, the writing was so good because as you described, they describe how she describes the cave with the light coming down, and like you really feel it. It's very evocative and very powerful and very poignant. And I'm glad I misremembered that he was alone, because I'm glad you sorted me out on that. But I just remembered the pathos of that whole part where, it's very obvious that he's being vulnerable too, around his buddies, and his son too, at that point. And
since we're on that topic, one of the other things I'll bring up about Zarabeth is one of the powers that Zar has is he can feel when others are in pain or die. He was out hunting when his mother fell, she fell and broke her neck on the ice. Yeah,
that's how she died, yeah.
And it's another moment in the story where it's a very, oh my God moment where he tells about how he felt. He could feel her get hurt and actually felt her die. And when he feels someone die, it's extraordinarily painful for him and he passes out and such. So he knew she was gone and couldn't get to her in time to help save her, which is another sad moment. There's two people on the planet pretty much. And one of them's your mother and she dies and you can't do anything about it. And then you're alone for 8 years before Kirk and Spock and McCoy come and get you.
Right. Now, I mean, there were other people on the planet, but they're way...
Just way, yeah.
They're so far away that, it doesn't even matter. But, Dan, I think that's one of the glorious things about sci-fi is that you can tell these kinds of stories, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm reminded of another sci-fi show, Babylon 5, without going too far into it, where humans develop psychic powers at one point in the history of the show. And there's this one character who talks about as a young girl, when she first started to develop her psychic powers, one of the first things she ever felt was her own mother's love for her. Like she was feeling her mother's love for her. She was reading her mother's thoughts. Yeah. Not like, I need to go to the store and pick up coffee in Danish, but she was actually feeling her own mother's love. And like, there's no words for that. Right.
Absolutely.
And it's only in these sci-fi stories that you can really talk about this kind of stuff, Yeah. And so you strip out sort of the accoutrements of modern day life when you put them into these sci-fi stories, time travel and space battles and all that, and you still have a relationship with a father who can't quite come to terms with his son. Mm-hmm. And there's no more human story than that. Right. And I think it's just fantastic. It's a fantastic story. I love everything about it. And I really thank you, Dan, for taking the time to talk with me about it. Why don't you tell people where they can find you and your partner in crime, the other Trek Geek Bill?
Oh, we don't need to talk about him.
No, we don't. but he slipped me 5 if I wheedled you about him. So there you go.
No, he's such a good friend. Bill Smith and I can be found on Camp Kittimer on Facebook, of course. And of course, we drop our weekly episodes of Trek Geeks usually on Tuesdays. You can find us on Twitter at Trek Geeks. You can find us on Instagram at Trek Geeks, TrekGeeks.com. Anything Trek Geeks is usually Bill and I. So just type that in and you'll find us somewhere, man. I can be found on Twitter at Trek Geek Dan, and he is at Trek Geek Bill. So like I said, Trek Geek, man.
Thanks, Dan. I appreciate you.
I can't thank you enough for letting me be here tonight with you, John, to talk about this fantastic book. 5 out of 5 stars. It's a great read. You will not be disappointed. And I can't wait to come back again sometime.
Perfect, man. Let's do it. I was very much appreciative of getting Dan back on the show to talk about Yesterday's Sun. As it turns out, actually, I was on the East Coast a little while ago as we record this, and I was actually able to meet up with Dan, and we had this hilarious incident where... What is it, M5?
You have a message. Should I play it now?
Didn't we go over this last time? There are no messages during the show, my man. We play them at the top. You know this.
I want to play the message.
Goodness gracious. All right, let's see. Oh, it's from Annika Dane, who was guest on episode 31. Let's play it.
Happy birthday, Trek Profiles. I'm really excited to have been on the show, and I love listening to it. I love it for hearing personal stories about people that I only know online or only get to see once a year at a convention or so. And so I think it's a real service to the fandom, and I'm really glad you're doing it. May the Force be with you.
Thank you so much, Annika. I loved having you on the show. One of the things that inspired me about Annika and her Star Trek story was the massive and varied creativity that she has. She does cosplay, screen cap recaps of episodes. She does fashion and so many other things. I honestly wish I had a fraction of that. So check out her site at manicpixiedust.com for more. All right, moving along. I've now got my friend Ali Martinez on. We had a heck of a hard time actually organizing a time to meet. Ali's in Japan right now, so when we recorded, it was early in the morning for her and around dinner time here. And I wanted to get Ali on to talk about a Deep Space Nine episode that means a lot to me, and I suspect to many of you as well. M5, press play.
everyone, and welcome to Trek Profiles. I'm really excited to be here. I was on Trek Profiles a while ago, but now I get to return, and this time I get to ask the questions. So I'm going to try to make John think just as hard as he made me think on my interview, because I was pulling answers out of way places I didn't even know. But I'm super excited to be here today, and we're going to be talking about Deep Space Nine Season 7, Episode 10. It's only a paper moon, which is one of my very favorite episodes, and I think for a lot of us, it is as well. It's also very relevant right now as Aaron Eisenberg passed away this last year, and it was really hard for me to watch without tearing up, but I think it's going to be a great conversation. So for those of you that haven't seen the episode recently, I'll give you a quick recap. So in this episode, Nog is coming back from the Dominion War, and he has lost his leg. And this episode goes through the crew of Deep Space Nine is trying to help him readjust back to life outside of the war. And he's having a little bit of a hard time. And this episode explores kind of how he works through that in an interesting way. He forms a relationship with Vic Fontaine in the holosuite, and we'll get more into that later, but that's just a quick recap. And I am so excited to have all these questions for John, and I hope he's ready. Are you ready?
I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be. I'm strapped in with my 5-point harness, so let's go.
Good. I'm so excited. So the first question that I have for you is that it's actually focusing a little bit on Nog, because he's had such an incredible character arc in Deep Space Nine. So my question for you is, were you always a Nog fan, or did it take you a little bit to be a Nog fan? If so, when did that happen? Was it this episode, or what do you think of that character arc?
First of all, you got to love Nog, because he's one of the few characters that gets a real arc in the show. And if you look at a lot of them in Star Trek generally, characters don't get real in-depth development over a long period of time. I mean, Picard gets some in TNG, but Riker, not so much. Troy, not so much. If you look at Dr. Crusher, I think she's the identical character throughout all 7 seasons. She doesn't really grow in any particular way. It's not to say she's a bad character, but she's just not given the stories to really develop as a character. So I thought it was really great that Nog has a profound change in a significant way in the show. And actually thinking about Deep Space Nine more broadly, I actually don't care for most of the Starfleet characters in the show. I don't really connect with them. They don't really speak to me on any particular level. I could take them or leave them, except with the exception of Ezri. She's my favorite, I think, of the Starfleet characters. And Vic is one of my favorites, which is why this episode is great for me. And Quark, actually. So the 3 of them are my favorites in Deep Space Nine, and 2 of them are quite prominently featured in this episode. And as I watch the episode, it is a Nog story. It's also a Vic story. And then if you look at the 3rd level, it's really an Ezri story. Also, she has probably more to do than anybody else as far as the rest of the characters. And she does some counseling up in here, yo. So I just thought it was great that I get this episode that also has Las Vegas in it, which is, of course, the city where I live, and I have an irrational and exuberant love for that goes beyond all rationality. So I get to have my city in the show and these favorite characters of mine talking about something that matters a lot to me. So it was like the confluence of all these crazy things that sort of intersected to make this probably my favorite episode of Deep Space Nine by a lot.
Oh, good. I'm so glad. That's what makes it so exciting to ask you all these questions about it, because I'm just excited to see what we're going to get into. So actually, I love that you said that Ezri is one of your favorite characters. So in the short time that we get to see Ezri in Deep Space Nine, she really steps into her role as a counselor, and I really admire her for that. And I really think she demonstrates her talents, like you said, in this episode. So how do you think you would compare her style of counseling to what else we've seen? I know you mentioned Counselor Troy, but what is it about her style? Is it her personality? What do you think that makes it work in this episode?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think that when you compare Ezri versus Jadzia, which I think is the inevitable comparison, right? You have Jadzia, who's this person who had a goal and was hell-bent on achieving it, and she did. And so she was kind of sitting pretty, right? I wanted to be get selected to have a symbiont. That was my goal. I worked incredibly hard at it, and I got it, right? And I'm awesome. And that's sort of where her character comes from. And she's great at all the things, all the sciencing stuff that she does, and it's fine. Whereas you have Esri, who is trying to be a counselor and had no interest in this whole symbiont thing, right? No interest. And all of a sudden she gets the symbiont because she just happened to be there, and it, I think, gives her kind of a humility, I think, about the experience, which I think serves her well as a counselor, because she knows what it's like to have sort of this awkwardness in your life that you didn't want and didn't plan for and have to deal with. And so it gives her a way to access that maybe she would not have had fully had she not had that symbiont put into her at the last minute without any planning or forethought and without really her wanting to have that happen.
Yeah.
So I just thought it was a great thing. And I really appreciated how in the episode she really stands up to all the other people around. I mean, at one point, I forget which character it is, but it might have been Nog himself who's asking something of Cisco, and she just steps right up and says, here's what we're going to do, or this is the right thing. This is what we're going to do. And at another point, she's pulling her mojo on Vic. She says, of course you have a plan. Vic Fontaine would not ever not have a plan. So put your plan together, Vic, and, make it happen. And then he's like, oh, I got to have a plan. and I just really enjoyed how she, in a very low-key, non-counselor-y way, was a great counselor. And I think that's what made her great, is that she didn't approach things as a counselor. She approached things just sort of as a person. And I think it made her even better because of it. So I really loved everything about the character.
Good. I'm glad. I think I've always found Esri to be a lot more relatable than Deanna. I love Deanna Troi, but I see a lot of myself in Esri. So I'm glad that you also enjoy her.
Absolutely.
So at the very beginning of the episode, we see Nog come off this transport, and they're waiting for him, and they're not sure, is he on this transport? Was he on the list? And there's the whole crew is there. Lita and Rom are there, and just like this whole family, this Deep Space Nine family that we've come to just like really connect with after all these seasons. So I think personally that Deep Space Nine is a little bit more family oriented, especially with family characters that we see like Rom and Nog or Jake and Cisco. Mm-hmm. Do you think that in this episode, how does that family orientation come in? Because we see his family try to help him, not just blood family, but family because they're together on this station and they've come to really respect each other. How do you think that family dynamic plays in this episode? Because we see a little bit of elements of it when they're trying to help him, but what do you think?
Well, we sort of have the different concentric rings of family. We have at the center, you've got Cisco with Jake. So that's sort of a traditional, single parent family that we have there, right? Because the mom's out of the picture, passed away at the Battle of Wolf 359. And then we've got sort of the family that you get assigned, right? The people that you're with, whether you like them or not, whether you care for them or not, these are the people that you're at your duty station with, and you have to deal with them every day and hear their stories and do all the things with them. And that's the family that is sort of inflicted upon you. And I think that they all relate in different ways. And so you've got characters like, say, Odo, who's not in this episode really hardly at all, if I think about it, except for maybe still a couple lines or two. But you've got Odo, who has to make do with Quark. He's got to make do with Cisco and all these people that he didn't choose to be around that were inflicted upon him. And after a while, they sort of get to be a kind of a family, which I really appreciate. And I think that that's very true. And it's something that we didn't get in TNG in a lot of ways, even though we had families on board. I mean, and I don't think you actually saw much. You didn't get scenes of Beverly and Will being familial. Mm-hmm. Like someone coming home at the end of the day and saying, the replicator wasn't working today and I had this horrible lunch. Well, what did you do about it? Like there's a million, they just seem very sort of sterile to me. And I think that's what they were given. I don't think it was the fault of the actors. It's just, I don't think they were given scenes to really demonstrate that a lot. So it's one of the things I really appreciate about Deep Space Nine was that we got some of that here for sure. I think if you want to see another example of it, that's just strictly the people that you're with is Voyager, right? I mean, that's where not only are these the people that you're stuck with, you're going to be stuck with them essentially for the rest of your life. Yes. And so that's sort of the other thing, that's sort of set to the stops. Whereas even in a military assignment, in the modern world, eventually there'll be orders and you'll go someplace else. But on Voyager, that ain't happening. But anyway, I digress. We're supposed to be talking about Paper Moon here. Sorry.
No, it's all good. I'll actually kind of flip into one of the most exciting things I find about the episode, and that's the music. Being a musician myself, I really, really connect with this style of music that's right in my sweet spot there. And so in the episode, after we see Nog come back, he is laying in his room listening to I'll Be Seeing You over and over and over again. And it's starting to drive Jake crazy. And he thinks of this song and wants to listen to it because in that moment, you see a flashback to the war where Bashir was playing it and it helped him calm down when he was hurt. It made him feel better. I believe in the episode it says it helped me in a time when I was unhappy. Yeah. Like that. And so my question for you is actually really interesting. So Nog connects with this song. Do you have a song like that you connect with and that you can think of that made you feel better in a time that you were unhappy? Pulling out all the stops, John, making you think.
Well, I'm going to need a minute to think on this.
I can share mine if you.
No, please do.
Mine is a Sinatra tune, and it's called "Come Fly with Me."
Fly with me, come fly, let's fly away.
Yeah. And also,
I can't sing worth a damn, but I know the song.
I also really, really enjoy "Fly Me to the Moon." It's also another Sinatra one. That's my husband and I's our song. So I suppose that's an important one. But have you thought of one yet?
It's really funny. There's a song called "King of Birds" by REM, which is probably my one of my most favorite songs of all time, and it's actually not that great a song in their catalog. It's not one that would probably be people would put up there. If you're even an REM fan, people would know the song, but they wouldn't say that that's one of the best songs. But it's a song that ties back to a time in my life when I was incredibly happy, and it's because it comes it was very late 80s, 1990, early 90s when I was listening to that, even though the song is from an earlier period of time. And it was right about the time I was finishing up at college and going into the Navy. And I was very excited about where I was and what I was doing and what was going to be happening. I had a boundless enthusiasm for my life. I felt like there was this great big road in front of me and I was about to take this step. And I just was waiting, and I was taking some college classes while I was waiting to get started with all of that. And it was just, and my parents were around back then. They've both since passed, so it makes me think of them. I was living at home temporarily with both of them at the time. And everything was just aces, as Vic might say, at the time. And so it's a song that I always think of fondly. And whenever I put it on, it's a song that brings me back to that time in my life and makes me incredibly happy.
Oh, good. I'm glad. I've actually, don't get mad at me, I've never heard that song before. I have to listen.
It's not the kind of song that people would know. It's not. You'd have to be an REM fan to really know it, but it's out there. I'm sure you could find it somewhere on iTunes or something.
I'll look it up for sure.
All right.
So my next question, you were talking about how Vic Fontaine is one of your favorite characters. So Vic Fontaine really takes center stage in this episode, and I love it. But we also see a few other holographic characters that have that sort of side to them. So in TNG, we see Minuet, right?
Yes.
It's a little bit different than most holograms that we see. And obviously in Voyager, we see the Doctor who takes that to a whole new level. But with Vic Fontaine, what do you think? Because originally when Nog comes in, Vic knows that he's come back from the war and he's lost his leg. He says people talk, so he knows. But do you think that originally he had all this already thought out? Because holograms work differently. What do you think that, because Esri comes in and she says, hey, do you know what you're doing? This probably isn't the best place for him to like rehabilitate. And he says, no, this is the perfect place for him to rehabilitate because he wants to get away from that reality. So what is it about Vic? What is it about him that makes this work?
I think there's two things about Vic that are really interesting. First, of course, is that he's a self-aware hologram. So he knows that he's an artificial being. He knows that he's a light bulb, as he calls himself from time to time. But at the same time, he has the constraints of his programming. And if you want to see an example of that in the episode, he wants to do his books. Like, the books don't matter, Vic, and nothing is going to happen. But he's like, but I'm a hologram. You know, he doesn't say, like, I'm a hologram and I'm programmed to care about this. But that's essentially what it is. He's like, no, I have to care about how my business is doing. It's because he's programmed to. And it's just part of his program, and he has to do his books. And of course, Nog helps him with that. And I think it's just this very interesting confluence that he's self-aware, but in certain areas he cannot help but do the things that he's required to do because he was written that way. And, you know, it's sort of like being a person, right? You can decide you don't want to ever eat, but you're going to have to eat. It's mandatory. You cannot not do it. Now, you can make choices about what you eat, but you have to eat something. Whereas you can entirely choose whether or not certain other things in your life, maybe your attitude about a particular thing or your ideas about a certain strategy or life choices you can make changes on, but there's certain things you just have to do. And he is actually stuck in that same circumstance. He can't escape his programming, but he's aware of it. And he's got to sort of tread that path that's laid out before him. And I just thought it was a very interesting idea. And he's trying to help Nog as much as he can, which is interesting because it shows that he cares about things which are happening outside the holodeck or not holodeck. It's the holosuite. Yep, it's Deep Space Nine, where he can't even go. But he wants Nog to do well and to have this life in the big bad world that he can't even go to. And I thought, what a selfless thing. How wonderful is that?
Yeah. I had such a hard time watching this episode because, like I mentioned earlier, that Aaron Eisenberg had passed earlier this year. And I mean, already this episode made me tear up even before that happened. But now it's just really hard to hold it all in, especially when it still feels pretty fresh. And Aaron Eisenberg was such an impactful person in the Star Trek community. And it was so obvious to see that after his passing. So many people came out and shared stories and shared pictures and just talked about what an incredible person he was in this Star Trek family that we have. So do you have any stories or anything about Aaron that really speaks to you, especially in the wake of his passing? For this, after he passed, this episode was one that a lot of people came back to and watched. And just with his performances in Deep Space Nine, like what did that say? I mean, about his performances, what does it speak to you?
This is getting into what I think is the meat of what I wanted to talk about, which is as a veteran, how I sort of approach this episode. And one of the things you can find on Memory Alpha, and when you just ask people about it, when you would ask Aaron about it, he would tell you that people would come up to him and say, I had a really hard time reintegrating when I came back from my deployments or wherever I was in the military doing whatever it was that I was assigned to do. And this episode helped me. Your performance helped me. And Aaron, as a young man doing the episode, you're just getting up and doing your job, and you're trying to do it really well. You're getting up, you're doing your performance, you're trying to hit your lines, hit your marks, do your thing. And that's the focus of your day. But I think it goes to show you that when you do art well, it can endure beyond your contribution to it. You made the episode, you put it out there, and today, right now, as we record this, there's probably someone who's watching that episode and is taking something from it that helps them. And I think that that's just a glorious testament to any art, whether it be media like TV or whether it be a painting or whether it be some other thing. I often have an interest in these articles when they discover old cave paintings, right? And they're like, oh, we've discovered cave paintings from, 12,000 years, 15,000 years ago, or 100,000 years ago in a cave in France. And you look at these crazy little cave paintings, right? And you think, here's some person who painted this, right? Some vast in the past ancestor of ours who painted something on the wall. And here we are looking at it and being amazed by it, right? And that little piece of that person, that art that they did, for whatever reason they did it, has survived to us today. And it's a connection between us, right? That's almost eternal. And I think that when Aaron did his work in this episode and put it out there, he made something that certainly outlived him and is having outsized impact. And I think that that's commendable and glorious.
Do you think that the episode is more relevant today than it was back then? Just as relevant? Was it more relevant then?
It's relevant all the time. It's always relevant. I got to say, because one of the reasons I asked you, I thought very hard about which people I wanted to ask which episodes to do on this extravaganza, because I had the people who've been on my show, and I didn't give any thought to doing a retrospective extravaganza when I asked people to be on the show, right? So I have the guests that I've got the episodes and books and movies that I've picked, and then I had to kind of match them up. And I knew that I wanted to talk about this one with you because if people don't know, you're married to an active duty service member. You're from a Gold Star family. You would understand what this is all about. And I think that there's some parts of it that can't even be spoken. And if you want to see an example of this, there's a really good example, and it's from another thing outside of Star Trek, which is, if you didn't know, for any people who are listening to this, Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and all of that, he was in World War I. He was at the Battle of the Somme. He was in some of the most horrific battles of World War I. And he has said, this is not apocryphal, he actually said that every single good friend of his was dead by the time he was 24 years old. And there's this scene that you can see in the movie Return of the King, when the four hobbits go back to the Shire and everything has been sorted out, and they're sitting in the Green Dragon, which is the pub that they used to go to all the time. And they're just, the four of them are sitting at the table, and like there's some farmer who's carrying on about his giant pumpkin, and there's like all these people carrying on with their lives. And they're just all kind of sitting there looking at each other and not saying anything. That's a scene from the movie, and there's very similar type scenes in the book. And it's this idea that they've had this experience that has so changed them that they can't give voice to it. And so often you see people who want them to give voice to it. I mean, in the episode, you've got Ram, who, I think it's one of the first lines in the episode, he's talking with Lita, and he's like, I don't even know how to deal with Nog right now. I don't even know what to say to him. And so what do? He comes back, he steps off the transport, and they all start like in a semicircle standing around him and applauding, which I think was probably not what I would have advised them to do. In fact, that was probably the worst possible thing to do. And I instinctively knew that, and I think you probably know that. But I think that they did not, the characters, and were probably doing it with the best of intentions, right? Thinking that would be a quote-unquote good thing to do, when in fact it was disastrously bad. And at least most of the veterans that I know are quite low-key about the whole thing. I personally am suspicious of guys and girls that are veterans as well, when they come in all full of crazy stories and glory hounding. I'm just very skeptical of it. Guys, because I was in the submarine service, and it was all guys. So pardon me for not using inclusive language, but it's descriptive because that's how it was. I was in a place to know guys who actually went places and did things, right? Not that I did that stuff, but I knew some of those guys. And they were incredibly humble and quiet about a lot of it. And that informed for me how I look at that stuff. And it informed for me how I think about dealing with people who've had these situations, because I just was in the submarine service. I worked in the reactor plant on a submarine. My biggest danger was getting hurt by a piece of equipment, or like getting an accidental electrical shock, right? And like a workplace safety kind of thing. We were very rarely in danger, right? There were a few times, but we were the danger. The thing that gets me is like when people conflate that with stories that they've seen in the movies, or they think that, I was, in Iraq or something, in the middle of the desert, which I never was, even though we were in war zones all the time. It's not the same thing when you're in a submarine. So it's just a very different kind of thing. But I'm in some groups here in town with some other veterans. And I have a very good friend who was in recovery in the Army. And what recovery does is a piece of equipment with people on board or not gets destroyed, that's the group that goes out and picks up the bodies and picks up the van or the Bradley or the tank or whatever it happened to be and brings it all back. That's what recovery does. And so that was his job. And I saw how he got affected. And when he's down and he calls me, he doesn't want rah-rah stuff. He's literally happy for me just to go and sit with him and have a beer and not say a thing or talk about the Vegas Golden Knights or talk about, whatever date he went on last week. That's all he wants. He doesn't want any of that other stuff. And I see this a lot too in some of the charity work that I do. There's an organization that we were involved with for a while that uses equine therapy for children of first responders and active duty military who've had problems. And the kids are acting out and they use this equine therapy, right? And you see how the kids react. You work shoulder to shoulder with them rather than face to face. And that's what they want. And in this episode, you see the family, you see everybody, with the exception of Ezri, trying to force Nog face to face. And he does not want that, right? Mm-hmm. And I totally got that. It is absolutely 100% correct in my experience in my life with guys I know who have been in it. And even the guys that, like me, who went and was carrying a Fluke multimeter. That was my sidearm, was a digital electrical meter and doing that stuff. We want to be shoulder to shoulder. We don't want to be face to face. And just knowing that you're there was the most important thing. And calling attention to it was definitely not the right thing. And so every time I see that applause scene right at the beginning, I kind of face palm and just maybe if I do it enough, they'll change the episode.
Well, I mean, you should be able to read the room there because everyone's like, oh, I'm so happy you're back. But he just wants to be left alone. He does say at one point that at the starbase he was at, in the recuperating, that they were just forcing him to talk. And he's like, I've been talking to counselors for 3 months. I don't want to talk to anyone else at this point. And I can totally understand that. So there's this moment in this episode where Nog talks about how, yeah, I was in the war. I saw a lot of people get hurt. I saw a lot of people die. But I never thought it was going to be me. And that, it just really strikes me because I feel like, as coming from a Gold Star family, for a lot of people, we never thought that would happen. You never do. And I just think that this so incredibly, in such this subtle way, this doesn't have to be a moto episode, like you said. It doesn't have to be rah-rah. And yet it's still
moto is a Marine word for motivational. So I have to translate the Marine jarhead speak for the civilians out there. So if you're in your gear and in your kit and you're having a 5-mile run and then you fall and break your foot and your sergeant comes up to you and he's like, "What's the matter with you?" You're like, nothing. That was that breaking my foot was motivating. That'd be the kind of thing they'd want you to say. It was
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just love that this episode doesn't have to be that. It doesn't have to be gung-ho. It's just so subtly, in its own way, explains about the real life struggles that people go through. And I love that you shared your story. And I mean, just your experience being in the military and how you knew other people that have been going through stuff like this. That's just such an incredible thing to be able to share that with them and help them work through it.
Absolutely. And it's and these guys know that, I didn't have those experiences. I wasn't the guy who was out there, running up a hill with an M16 or something like that, right? I mean, but you go where you go, you get sent where you get sent, and you do the best you can. And that's all you can do. And, we all know that that's the story in the military, no matter what branch you're in or whether you're an officer or enlisted or some other kind of crazy thing. And so there is kind of that brotherhood or sisterhood there that you can sort of connect on that level. And so it gives me the ability to at least say, I understand a little bit. Mm-hmm. I understand a little bit. And I'm not going to treat you like some civilians have a want to do out of the best of intentions, mm-hmm. where they start by saying things like, well, thank you for your service, which most veterans I know hate that.
My husband hates that. So.
I honestly have never met a veteran who's like, yeah, I love it when they say that. I've yet to meet that person. I'm sure they exist somewhere, but I've never met that person. So it gives me the ability to connect with people. And that's why I enjoyed some of the charitable work I was able to do and really contribute and help out some of these other veterans that I know, and working with the equine therapy that we had here in town. So that was a really good thing. And I really enjoyed that.
Good. I'm so glad. Is there a moment in this episode that, because I mean, there's so many beautiful moments in this episode, but is there like one that's like the defining moment of this episode for you? And why? Am I making it tough for you?
No, well, that's what you're here for. So good job. I think it's probably the most real moment for me in the whole episode is when Nog loses it in Vix and he engages in violence, right? And it is literally because he's at the end of his rope and he just does not know what to do. And all the civilians would be like, well, you need more talk therapy, or why can't you just behave like a normal person, right? Well, there's nothing normal about being in a war. It's literally the worst possible thing you can imagine. And it's not, oh, I had a bad day at the office. And so expecting someone to come back from that and to relate around normal things and to just be able to pick up and resume, it's very, very difficult to do. And I think that the particular stresses that Nog was under, it was just like squeezing a balloon, and it had to come out somehow. And when you think about the history of Star Trek, very, very rarely do you see characters just actually just going at it with each other, like having actual violence with each other, where they're not under control of some alien entity or some crazy thing like that, right? I mean, we have all those kinds of episodes, and I'm not talking about that, right? Where the characters are organically going to scrap. That's just not something you see in Star Trek, and that's something we got here. I think it was very true and very real, and it's something that when I watched, I mean, there's nothing in this episode as far as Nog goes that I didn't look at and say, yep, that was right on, because it all is right on, every bit of it. And I think that was probably the most right on of all the moments, when he just got to where he couldn't handle the pressure anymore and the relief valve had to go, and it never goes in a positive way with these people that have been in these kinds of circumstances. It usually comes out in some sort of self-destructive way. And that's what we saw.
Yeah. Oh, it's just like, I totally agree with you when you said that moment. I mean, especially because it's Jake, and I believe Keisha is her name, his girlfriend. Mm-hmm. It's not something that, like you said, we would normally see, and let alone even Vic says something afterwards like, you hit your best friend. Like, why would you do that? And it just, everyone's trying to, like you said, make him feel better, but they don't know the right way to make him feel better. And Ezri says, sometimes time, or Vic says something, and Ezri's like, sometimes time is the best, like, heals all wounds, time heals all wounds. And Nog decides early on that he wants to be in the holodeck, and that's his choice. Mm-hmm. This is where I'm going to rehabilitate. I want to kind of step away from reality, because there's this moment where we see where Vic says, why are you here? Why won't you leave after he shuts the program off? And says, why here? Why in the holodeck? And Nog breaks down. And he says that he's scared to go back to reality. And I mean, I know you said that you didn't have like a necessarily wartime experience, but like kind of transitioning back into civilian life, did you have an experience that was sort of like that? Was it, I mean, just the adjustment, maybe not in the same fashion, but when you adjusted back to civilian life, was it a change?
I'm always very sensitive about how I talk about stuff like this, because I don't want to be that guy that in the office that just says to people, I was going to say something very impolitic here, but I would have had to have bleeped it. I don't want to be that guy that just says, calm down, just relax, take it easy. It's just a job. But I can say that being in the service has inured me against a lot of the other trivialities that set people off the deep end in the office. I mean, the worst thing that sets people off in the office is like someone took a soda out of my lunch, right? Or this person was late with their project. I was like, well, at least you don't have to go home and eat dinner with that person who did that to you, and then sleep 7 inches away from them and hear their same stories again. And, in fact, you're going to spend the next 7 months next to that person, whether you like it or not. And in fact, if they do the wrong thing, they could kill you. Which on a submarine, you can. If you turn the valve wrong, you can kill people. And there's been stories that I've told, of people doing things on the ship they should not have done by mistake that hurt people. And that's how it happens. And so when I'm in an office that if it's on fire, I don't have to put it out, and that doesn't mean we don't try to do a good job. You always try to do the best work you can, but there's nothing that's going to happen in my office job that is going to even 0.25% approach the stress that I used to deal with when I was on the ship. It's just not. And so it's made me very cool and calm in the office. And I'm not going to get spun up or spun off about anything that happens, because at the end of the day, I get to go home, and I don't have to live with you people. And actually, I'm speaking over my entire career in all the places that I've worked, because I love where I work and the people are great there. I have nothing bad to say about it at all. It's a fantastic place. But there's been some other places that I've been where there was a lot of hate and discontent, and I just couldn't get wrapped up in it because it just didn't affect me, because I was like, they're paying me. I'm here. I'm doing the work. Life is good. It's all aces, baby.
I have two more questions for you. I won't take up too much of your time. But so in the episode, they have something in the future that's like the holosuite. So you can go and escape that reality. Do you think that was, we see that it did help Nog, but do you think that is a good therapy method to be able to kind of displace yourself? Or, I'm no counselor. I'm not Esri or Deanna, but with the expansion of virtual reality these days, we're getting closer and closer to being able to do something like that. I can see how it would be helpful for especially military members transitioning back after a wartime experience, but I can also see when they shut off the holosuite that people could get so attached to it. It's kind of like this double-edged sword that we see. So what do you think about that?
I'm glad you had that perspective, Allie, because I'll tell you, I had a completely different take on it. Completely different. When I look at how the holosuite is used in this, I take it absolutely as a stand-in for chemical alteration and substance abuse. Because that's frankly what I'm thinking of. Another friend of mine who God bless him, but this guy got really, really messed up where he was. He saw a lot of bad stuff, and he came back and he was really into chemical alteration and substance abuse. And I think that is a one-to-one parallel to what was going on with the holosuite in this episode, right? People want to escape reality, and they don't want to be where they are in the circumstances that they're in. And in 2020, as we record this, these people are just engaging in chemical alteration to try to numb it and to escape it. And that's what I saw in the episode. I did not think, man, this will be a great therapy thing. I'd have to think about that because I frankly never gave it a thought. To me, it was just a one-to-one match for people choosing to alter their chemistry. Which is not something that, generally speaking, I don't oppose. I'm generally live and let live. If people want to do that stuff, it doesn't bother me too much. But I think that in this case, it was really to avoid dealing with some things in Nog's life that he really needed to deal with. And in my friend's life, he really needed to deal with some things that he didn't. And instead, he was spending his time doing that. And it was just delaying for him dealing with those things. So it was just delaying the inevitable. It really wasn't a matter of coping. It was just a delaying tactic. And that made it unhealthy.
Yeah, I'd have to ask a counselor more in depth. I'll ask my therapist about what she thinks, if that would be something that would actually be beneficial. And we see something kind of like that too in TNG with like Hollow Pursuits, where Barclay recreates all the characters on the holodeck, and he does it to like blow off steam. And of course, there's that silly scene where Deanna comes in and sees herself and is like, no, we're going to shut this off. But one thing I found that was interesting, I don't know if you noticed, but that episode's called Hollow Pursuits. And in this episode, at the very end, when Nog is talking to Vic about like who he is and, hey, well, we're going to build this new casino and all that. And Vic mentions something around like, well, like I'm a hologram, because he knows. And he's like as hollow as I am. And I thought that was a really interesting like juxtaposition between, hey, that was in the purpose of the episode in TNG.
You thought it was a callback?
I thought it might have been. I don't know.
Maybe
I might be looking too much into it.
It could be. I don't know. I didn't even catch it, so good on you.
You mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to see if you want to go a little bit more in depth.
Okay.
What does this episode mean for you in your Star Trek story? You have a Star Trek story, and you interview other people about their Star Trek stories. But what does this episode, what does it mean for you in your Star Trek journey? Other than how you've already related it to for your personal life.
Sure. So often today, especially when people are looking at TV or other media entertainment, whether it's streaming services or movies or whatever, there's a lot of talk about representation. And a lot of times when people are talking about representation, at least it seems to me, and I could be wrong about this, I don't mean to speak on behalf of the world or anything, but it seems to me that when people are talking about that, they're usually talking about people that look like themselves in some way, and or have some sort of innate characteristic. And when I look at this episode, I see representation of someone who I can identify with, not because they look like me or have some characteristic like me, but because they're a veteran like me. And so often in discussing Star Trek with people, and this has come up on the podcast a bunch of times, I would often say things like, well, in the real military, that would never happen like that. Or this is just ridiculous, and I don't even mean to say that there's some policy or procedure about something or something like that. That's not even what I'm talking about. I'm just saying on a ship, there's just a way that things have to happen and a way that things get operated. And I don't care if it's a cruise ship, a battleship, or a towboat. There's certain things that have to work a certain way. And the writers are doing their best to tell a story and not get caught up in that stuff. And so sometimes they take shortcuts or they don't research something, and something it takes me out of the episode when I look at it. I'm like, oh my God, they're doing that thing. That is not how it works, and it just takes me right out of it. This is an episode where every single thing was right on the money. Well, what part of Nog's, the way Nog was written in this episode would you change? Nothing. What part of Aaron's performance, did he too much, not enough? It was just right. All of it. Every single point was right there. The lines were there. The performances were there. And it was true to me. And I saw an experience with that character that had representation for me. And it was something that I really connected with in a way that especially for Deep Space Nine, I did not really connect with a lot of it. And so I think that was probably the moment, the high point of my connection with Deep Space Nine was Nog in that episode.
I love that. That's such a wonderful story. I actually have my husband, we haven't gotten to Deep Space Nine yet, but I think that he's really going to be moved by that episode when he does get a chance to see it. But thank you. That's such an incredible story.
Oh, well, thank you, Ellie. And thank you for taking the time to come and talk to me about this. You're halfway around the world. You're in Japan, and I'm in Las Vegas as we record this. So it's morning for you. You're having your coffee and a donut, and I'm having a sip of vino here after a long day's work. So it's we're like 12, 13 hours out of sync. But I really appreciate you finding the time to talk to me about this. It was a great way for me to show my appreciation for the guests on Trek Profiles who make the show, because I am the host, but it's really about the guests. And so it was my way of roping y'all in and getting you back on. So I'm glad you agreed to be on.
Of course.
So, Allie, why don't you tell people where they can follow you and keep up with all of your shenanigans?
Oh, wonderful. Of course. So I can be found primarily on Twitter. My handle is @TTrekkie. I also do a very strange Tuesday morning video where I wear a towel on my head and talk about random things. It's been on hiatus with the holidays lately, but it's coming back. And you can listen to my new podcast coming out very soon from Trek Geeks. It's called Who is Trek? You can find that on Twitter at the @ Who is Trek. I'm really excited to do that with my dear friend Shashank Avaru from Trek. Politics. My brain right now. Too early. But also you can find me on other social media platforms like Facebook. You can look up 24-Year-Old Trekkie. You'll find me there. You can find me on Instagram at the same handle as Twitter at @TTrekkie. I also have a website, ttrekkie.wordpress.com. And I think that's about it.
Oh, that's it?
Only that.
only those. Well, thank you, Allie, so much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
I appreciate Allie so much as a bright spot of positivity and really joy in the Star Trek fandom. And I think that came through when she was a guest on episode 18. I particularly enjoyed her talking about why Trek matters to her, why she cosplays, and also why it's such a big part of her social media presence around Star Trek. So check out that episode if you haven't. But before I move on, I want to make sure to tell all of you something really important. It's that M5, it better not be a message. Don't say it's a message.
It's a message.
Who from?
Andrew Heaton, guest from episode 24.
Oh, I love Heaton. Let's play it.
Hello, John and Trek Profiles listeners. This is Andrew Heaton, guest alumnus of this fine program, as well as the host of my own Alienating the Audience. And I want to congratulate you on 2 extraordinary years of your outstanding podcast. Outstanding in a variety of ways, but my favorite is this. It brings together and highlights the Star Trek community as a whole. We all love Star Trek. We love the plot, we love the characters, we love the themes, but also a component of Star Trek is the fans. It's us. We're a part of this too. And I think Trek Profiles is a wonderful example of that and a wonderful reminder that we're all a part of this really cool group of people that come together and just love an extraordinary show. And I'm very grateful that I have been a part of that, and personally grateful because I didn't realize it was a community until I met John. I went on the program. I had a really good time. It was a fun interview. I, several months later, started my own science fiction podcast, and the first person I reached out to was the only other person I knew with a sci-fi podcast. That's John and Trek Profiles. So I reached out. John, within 15 seconds, responded with a lengthy email of all of the guests he recommended that I would bring on. Happy to do an introduction, happy to come on himself, and has really been helpful to me. I didn't know what an awesome, inviting community the Star Trek world is outside of the boyhood conventions that I went to, but it is in fact vibrant and welcoming. And if you're listening to this program, you're a part of it. So John, I want to thank you for being so awesome, so helpful to me, and for doing a commendable job on your show. And like a Ferengi with a microphone, I do need to plug my own stuff for a moment. I host a program called Alienating the Audience, which is a deep, deep dive on science fiction. If you like learning about what science fiction is about, what Robert Heinlein was thinking, the worldview promulgated by Star Trek, the zeitgeist communicated by the Twilight Zone, or weird thinky questions like, are we living in a simulation? Or if we were going to send a colony ship to another world that took 1,000 years, how many people would we put on the ship? If that sounds fun to you, I invite you to, in addition to this fine podcast, come over to mine, Alienating the Audience. Thank you, listeners. Thank you, John. Live long and prosper.
Thank you, Andrew, for your Podiversary wishes. I appreciate your kind words, and it really was a thrill to introduce you to the Star Trek fandom. And for all of you out there, I am an eager listener to his show called Alienating the Audience, as he said, and I'd recommend it without reservation. Next up, I'm going to have a talk with my real-life sci-fi friend, Amy Nelson. We get into this a bit during the talk, but I'm really very grateful to all the guests who very early on agreed to be on the podcast before they even knew what it was. They took a shot, and Amy was one of those. So I invited Amy back on to talk with me about an episode that's very dear to me, but I suspect that it might be a surprising pick for all of you out there. I don't know. Let's hit it, M5, and see what the folks have to say.
Hello, this is Amy Nelson, and I am your occasional guest host here for this little segment, which I am so honored to be on. So my guest is John Krikorian. John, welcome.
Hey, welcome to my own show.
Yes. You know, you have started something so amazing, Trek Profiles. I have absolutely loved listening to each episode and was honored to be included. So thank you for having me on. But you've done something remarkable and so unique. I'm just excited to continue on and listening and to hear where you are going to take and who your next hosts are going to be. Like, just real quick, where do you find these people?
I have my sensor nets deployed, and I'm scanning at maximum power in all sectors. So
yes,
the main thing is I look for people that have interesting stories to tell, and I just keep my eyes open on social media. I read all the people that post. They're posting articles on StarTrek.com, which they have sort of that not quite open submission policy, but they do have a lot of people pitching stories, and some of them are quite interesting. I read anything on Medium that people post. That's how I found Janae Fowler, for instance, who talked about her experience as a Jehovah's Witness. I just keep my eyes open, and anytime anybody tweets anything, anytime anybody sends me something, I look at it. Nice. It was really interesting how I found, because as we record this, I just released episode 29 with Maggie McNeil, who's the sex worker and an activist. And the way that I found her, hilariously, was someone who follows me on Twitter, and I honestly don't remember who, had retweeted something of hers. And so I tapped on it, and it took me to her blog page, where she's a prolific blogger, and she has all these pictures of T'Pol, and I was like, what? I was like, what is happening right here? Like, there's all these Star Trek pictures on this site where this woman is talking about, sexual rights and all this kind of stuff. Yeah. And I was like, I got to get this person on and find out what this is all about. So that's basically what I do. Wow. But I have to go back to one thing, though, Amy, that you said, which was thanking me for doing the show and having you on. I have to thank you because you agreed to be on before the show had come out.
Yes.
So you did not know what the show was when you had agreed to be on. I just sent you a thing. It's like, hey, you want to be on my podcast? I'm launching one. And you were like, sure, I'll do a Star Trek podcast. And you really didn't know what it was. So I really appreciate you taking the leap with me. It was a fun time, and people didn't know what the show was going to become at that early time.
Right.
The first few guests, you and Haley and Barry, you guys didn't know. Now people do. And I got people who are volunteering to be on, which is great, but it's more than I can fulfill, but it's a good place to be in.
Yeah, it is. Well, let's get into why we are here and following your show's script here. You chose a very interesting episode from The Next Generation, which happens to be my favorite, and you chose Homeward, and that is a season 7 episode. And listeners, if you don't remember, this is the one where Worf and we meet Nikolai Rozhenko. And Nikolai is down on this planet and there's trouble going on, the atmosphere of the planet. So, I was watching this knowing that you were going to talk about it. And I was like, okay, can I figure this out? Why does John like this episode so much? What is it that we're going to talk about? So I was thinking maybe this is a very big, heavy Prime Directive episode, because do we interfere with the natural going-ons of this planet and with this people? There is a great story with Worf and his brother Nikolai, so I was thinking maybe there might be something. So John, tell me, why Homeward?
I think when you just said interesting a few minutes ago, John picked an interesting episode. I don't, the audience can't see our video, but I think there were scare quotes that were appearing there because this is certainly not an episode that I think a lot of people would put into a top 10, nor do I think it's really a bottom 10 for anybody. I just don't think it shows up on people's radar. It's just sort of one of those ones in the middle that gets lost in things. I don't know if you feel any differently about it, but feel free to weigh in if you feel differently.
No, that's exactly, because you said Homeward and I was like expecting something a little more flashier, but this is, just right in the middle. No, people would not say, oh, that's my favorite, or, oh, I hate that. Like, it's just, it's there.
it's like the cheeseburger of Star Trek, right? You know,
Yes.
it's like everybody's eating them. We all love
Yep.
them, but it's not the kind of thing you're like, man, you know, that was really something, right? You know?
Yeah.
But it's interesting that you were trying to play guess the purpose, because I don't think we had ever actually talked about why I like this episode so much. I think that was you didn't have enough information, Amy. So, but first, I just like to talk about just some of the great things that are just in the episode itself, if you don't mind, which is, you know, we have this incredible performance by Paul Sorvino,
Yes.
who's just great in it. And I really enjoyed the whole concept of that you get the family that you get, whether you're born into it, whether you're adopted into it like Worf was, or whether you marry into it. That's the family that you have, and you didn't necessarily pick these people. I mean, you pick your partner, but all the family comes along with it, right? It's
Exactly.
you know, free and included with purchase. And so you have to make do. And one of the beautiful things that really sincerely touches me about the episode is there's a disagreement, obviously, about what should be done on the planet. And it's not a sort of an abstract sort of, you know, well, this is an interesting dilemma that you bring up, right? This is, okay, I believe we should save an entire civilization versus, nope, I think we should let them all die. That is a very, very big thing to be debating. And Worf and his brother are on completely opposite sides of that.
Yes.
Worf is completely bought into the prime suggestion, which is what I always call it, because you know how it, just in your conversation with Patrick, you were talking about the fact that something you don't really have to worry about too much, right? Unless things go sideways. But anyway, they're having this conversation in the turbo lift. And that's one of my favorite scenes in the episode. And you can tell that they're on completely opposite sides of the thing. But as opposed to taking out their bat'leths and having at it, or just punching each other senseless, you can tell that they really love each other. That they disagree down to the core of their souls, but they're not gonna scrap over it.
There is
right?
this great sense of respect. And, you know, you can hear that when they describe each other, you know, like Worf is describing Nikolai. And he's very intelligent and, you know, super smart. And then Nikolai is describing Worf. And you can tell that there is a great level of respect between the two. But yet they are so different from each other.
I think my favorite Worf line in that regard is when he says something like, Nikolai and I had many disagreements growing up. And I suspect they weren't like talking about, you know, should we have fish or chicken for dinner, right? Yes. I'm sure it was something a little bit more profound than that. But Worf was known to understatement for things like that. And anyway, the reason that I really latch on to that scene is because as a politically aware person, and as someone who, even though I don't talk about this or tweet about it much, I'm very much aware of sort of the news of the day and politics and what's going on in the news, and I have very strong feelings about it. I think that there's this sense that people who are on the opposite side of us must be destroyed, like they're monsters, right? Whatever side you're on, the other side are villainous cretins, and they must be mocked, vilified, and dismissed. And I've always tried to assume positive intent, and I do that with the people that disagree with me about politics, especially. Mm-hmm. And it's just a nice little scene that encapsulates that when the stakes are incredibly high, right? This isn't about what should tax policy be. This is, you know, we're going to condemn an entire civilization to death, right? What stakes could be higher than that? That's the whole thing.
Yeah.
And we are still going to arbitrate this in a reasonable way with some level of respect for each other without backing down on our beliefs or saying, well, that's just my thought, LOL, right? We're going to have a serious discussion. And it's a skill that I think a lot of people lack. Mm-hmm. And, you know, maybe I'm bottom lining it there. And, you know, maybe I'm being pessimistic, but I really enjoy this episode because the stakes are so high and everyone's really passionate about their point of view, and they're not necessarily wrong.
Right. And one thing that I was thinking of as you were talking, like when Nikolai, he makes the choice and he beams them up, and it's like, okay, now what are the choices that the crew on the Enterprise D have? You know, are they going to sit and point fingers and scream and yell? No, we have to deal with the situation. And they look at where we're at, what are the choices we have, and then go from there. And they don't waste their time pointing fingers and blaming, although we all know Nikolai did this without permission, without, you know, but how they respond to that, I think, is very telling for what we can take into our lives.
Absolutely. And there's also a few character moments that I really enjoyed, particularly two that stick out to me. And these are minor things, but they're very sweet and very good, which is that Picard gives a little pep talk. Well, I don't know. Pep talk might be the wrong word, but he gives some encouragement to the crew as he's stepping off the bridge early on in the episode, talking about the importance of the Prime Directive, why it's important that we have to do this. And he understands how the crew's feeling. And he doesn't do things like that all that often. I've noticed in my Voyager watch through, which I've been live tweeting as we record this, that Janeway is much more that kind of captain. She's very much concerned about how the crew is feeling about things and has, I think, a higher emotional intelligence than Picard. And that's not a criticism. Every captain has their own strengths. But Picard, I think, had a little bit of a blind spot when it came to sort of the emotions of people around him, which is why he had to rely on Troy so much. For that, because she had to tell him things that I think a more perceptive captain would have picked up on his own. And in that moment, he knew to do that, to talk about why this was important to the bridge crew. And then he puts Riker in charge, before he goes to his ready room for his Earl Grey. And the other moment that I thought was really great was when the chronicler Voron is running around the ship after he escapes and he ends up in 10 forward. And Troy's the one who says, you know, I got this, you know, and she's the one who
steps up. Yeah.
She steps up. Right. And for the most part, you know, we never really get to see Troy really counsel a lot. There's really very few scenes where her particular skills, separate from being a Beta Z with her empathic skills, right? I'm putting that to the side. I'm saying as a pure counselor. This is one of those times where she gets to actually do that, right? And I'm not saying that there's other times too, like a lot of stuff with Barclay, and there's other times too. But it was just really nice to see in sort of this emergency moment that, you know, all the Starfleet people in the fancy uniforms, y'all just chill. I'm gonna take care of this, and she does a great job.
Yeah,
and that was nice to see. And you know, she doesn't get a lot of moments like that, so I really appreciated that. So those were my two great moments. And I also appreciated the performance of Brian Markinson as Voron, who later went on to be in Battlestar Galactica, which I did not realize as I was watching the show. He was in the Blood and Chrome show, which was a Battlestar Galactica sort of movie of the week that they did. And he was in that, and he was also in the Caprica series as well. So he was in both of those, and I had no idea until I was just doing my own research, getting ready for this. And I was like, oh my God, that guy's awesome.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and he just did a great job. Although I will point out that Penny Gerald, who has been in a lot of Star Trek, was also in this episode, although she's not given all that much to do except wring her hands and look scared. But it had just a great set of guest stars. So I don't know why people wouldn't like the episode. But there's really a whole nother thing which you wouldn't know that really gets to me and is really the bigger issue for me when I watch the episode. And it's something we've talked about with a lot of guests on the show, which is that whenever you watch an episode of Star Trek or any entertainment of any kind, you read a novel or listen to a podcast or watch a show of any kind, there's the things that the show has that it presents to you. And there's also the thoughts in your own head that you connect with and that occur to you because the show triggers some memory. And this episode is really about a bunch of people who are being forcibly relocated across the galaxy against their will. They didn't choose this. It's something that was forced upon them. Now, having said that, it was done with the best of intentions, right? Nikolai wants what's best for them. Picard says we have to help now, once Nikolai does this. So it's done with the best of intentions. But anytime I watch an episode where there's forced deportations or they even talk about something like this, for example, in Insurrection, it's the same thing, right? That's the Bad Admiral's plan, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to pack up these people, they're going to put them in these holodecks, and they're going to transport them to this other planet, right? Because they want the land. It's the same story. I actually could have picked that movie to talk about, but this came first chronologically. So I thought that this would be the more meaningful episode for me because it's the first one I saw, because Insurrection didn't happen till years after this. And that's really my family history. So I'm Armenian, and my family was living in the Ottoman Empire in the 1910s and had lived in the Ottoman Empire for many years. And the Ottoman Empire was incredibly old at the time and really was on its last legs as a political entity. And the last sultan, he had been deposed, really. And what had happened was a new government was put into place in the 1910s, and or actually right before that, but right around then. I might have the year wrong there, but a new government came into place, and it was run by these three fellas called the Three Pashas. And Talat Pasha, Ahmed Pasha, and Enver Pasha. They all had different roles, but they were basically the three guys who ran the thing. And their political party was called CUP, as CUP, the Committee for Union and Progress.
Okay.
And their plan for keeping the country together, among other things, was to say there's all these Armenians, Assyrians, and Greeks who are living in the eastern part of our country. We have to deport these people. We have to Islamicize this part of the country, and we have to make it safe for our people to live there, and we have to root out these other people. And their plan was not quite something that the Nazis would have done. They didn't decide to build gas chambers or anything like that. What they did was forced deportation. And so they, on the night of April 24th, 1915, a day that every Armenian knows, what happened was they began this by rounding up all the intellectuals, artists, artisans, community leaders, every single person of note in the Armenian community in Constantinople, and publicly hung them. That was there's pictures of this. It's well documented. People standing around having a great time looking at all these dead bodies. And that was the beginning of the whole thing. The next step, of course, was they went around to all the armed forces of the Ottoman Empire, and there were many Armenians who were serving in the military. They were all kicked out. They were all disarmed, of course, and then they were sent home after being disarmed, and then they were rounded up and forced to march into the desert without supplies or just what they could carry. Now, if you're going to do a forced march through the desert over hundreds and hundreds of miles without any preparation, without anything that you're going to take with you, including the idea that your soldiers are told, not to waste any time on people who aren't going to make it, it was the worst kind of slaughter you can possibly imagine. Of course, rape was the course of the day. Pregnant women, their bellies were sliced open, babies were taken out and impaled in front of the mothers. Many stories like this. Every Armenian knows these stories. It's a tragedy that everybody in my heritage knows about this. And I have a particular link to this because we all have our own stories about where our families were and what we were doing during these forced deportations. And my grandfather, my father's father, he was living on the outskirts of Ankara, which is currently the capital of Turkey. And he had a wife and three daughters who were raped and killed by their own government. And he was able to escape and got out of the country and was able to come to the United States, where basically he became an itinerant wanderer. And I got on a genealogy kick about 10 years ago, and I found out all this information, and I was able to look up the census records and find out when he came into the country, and I have a lot of this data. I found a record of him living in a boarding house in West Virginia with a bunch of other Armenian guys in the census records. And that was great because that confirmed a story that I'd been told in my family, but we never had proof, which was that he was living as an itinerant wanderer somewhere. And it was, I found out, West Virginia. He was working in this coal mine when there was a wandering itinerant priest. So we have our own church. There's an Armenian church, and we have our own priests. They always have these pointy hats they wear, very unique. So if you go into Google and you type in Armenian priest, you'll always see them with these pointy hats. So anyway, this itinerant priest was wandering around ministering to the diaspora, all the Armenians who had fled, right? And he meets my grandfather, whose name was Zadik, which means Easter, the holiday. So that's his name. And he says to him, he hears his story, and he says, I have a wife for you. Do you want to marry? You want to be married again? I have a perfect match for you. And so my grandfather says, sure.
Oh, my goodness.
And so this priest goes and sends word to Europe, where there was another set of priests, and they were kind of playing matchmaker with all these people in the diaspora who had, had lived through all this tragedy. And they shipped my grandmother, Virginie, over, and I have the record of her coming into the country. And I'm going on memory here for the dates, but it's very close to this. She comes into the country August 1st, like 1919. I have her getting, her birthday happened on like August 3rd. I found her wedding certificate in the records in West Virginia for 3 days later, like April 8th, in this rural place in Appalachia where this coal mine was. And my uncle Ara was born 10 months later.
Oh.
And my dad was born 2 years after that. And then there was a third brother after that. And it turned out that she had the exact same story. She was from Ankara, but she lived in the city and apparently came from a family of wealth and means. And her husband and 3 daughters had been killed in the deportations. So they kind of had these similar stories of loss, right? And that's how they got together. So it always makes it hard for me to talk about, because I wouldn't be here if this hadn't have happened, right? Mm-hmm. But anytime I hear these stories about deportations, about people being forced to move from one place to the other against their will, this is always the thing that comes up in my mind. And when I see episodes like this, or when I watch Insurrection, I almost can't judge it as a Star Trek episode or as any sort of story, because it brings up all these stories in me about my family history. And my grandfather, who I never got to meet, he passed away before I was born, and my grandmother and all of that. And, she apparently was a very sad woman, and, obviously, and, had a lot of tragedy in her life, like I talked about. So it really affects me every time I watch the episode, I think, in a way that is not accessible to people if they didn't have that background. Mm-hmm. Now, if you want a really interesting little oblique reference here, what had happened was after all of this had happened, and after World War I had ended, what had happened was that political party was actually pushed out, the CUP. The country of Turkey today, that government is not the government that did this. This is a new iteration of the Turkish government. But they still hold that none of this happened, by the way, that there wasn't a genocide. It wasn't a thing that happened. There was just some deaths because it was World War I and stuff happened. There were some deportations. It was very unfortunate, but it wasn't a genocide, which is really interesting because, well, I'll get to that in a second. Let me finish this part. So the CUP was pushed out. Those 3 guys, the 3 pashas, were actually tried and found guilty by the new government. And one of them was actually killed in a military encounter. The other 2 pashas fled and were living in other places. And so what happened is some of the Armenians in a party called the Dashnaknu Chun, they actually, or ARF, we would call it in English, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, they formed a committee and actually put together a plot called Operation Nemesis. How's that for a Star Trek reference? And they found these guys and executed them, the other 2 pashas. And so it was literally like a Secret Service type of operation, Operation Nemesis. And these guys went out and found these other 2 guys and took them out. And the world was much improved by their absence, I would think. But anyway, the current government does not choose to acknowledge the term genocide, which is interesting because the word genocide is a manufactured word. It's not a word that emerged in history. It was a word that was coined by a guy named Raphael Lamkin, who was a scholar. And he created the word to describe what had happened to the Armenians in 1915.
Oh.
He said, I am calling we're going to call, when this thing happens, we're going to call it a genocide. So do you remember a few months ago when we had gone out to dinner right before that show we all went to?
Yeah.
Which show? That was the John Cleese show, right?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Remember that? And
Yeah, you and I
gone
went.
out.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we had a whole bunch of people that went, but you and I had pizza before we went. And you remember how you and I ordered the exact same dinner?
Yes, we
Right?
did.
like even the same drink, we had the same pizza, we ate the exact same thing. Imagine if I said, you know what, I'm going to call that an Amy. Whenever somebody orders the exact same thing, we're going to call that an Amy. And then you say, oh, no, the term Amy does not apply to that particular thing. And you're like, but it was the thing that's called an Amy because it happened. You did it.
Yeah.
Right? That's exactly this case. They say, oh, no, the term genocide doesn't really apply to what happened. It's like the guy who invented the term invented it to describe that thing that happened.
To define this. Yeah.
Right. And there are several reasons for that. First of all, there are people in Turkey today living in the house that my grandfather owned. And so the idea is if you acknowledge it as a genocide, what's going to happen is they're afraid that people are going to come looking for some kind of compensation.
Right.
Second, there's political issues because the United States has a big Air Force base in Turkey, and the United States government doesn't want to push the issue because we want to keep access to the air base. And so the United States government has not pushed Turkey to acknowledge this, whereas many other European countries have said, nope, that's it, and Turkey should recognize it, but the U.S. government won't push it because we have a big air base there, which gives us the capability to reach a lot of the Middle East. So whenever you hear about us bombing something in the Middle East, a lot of times if it's a manned fighter craft, it's coming from the Incirlik base.
Yeah.
So that's the issues, right? And I don't mean to say that none of that that's unimportant. It's not. I understand that. But that's why when I watch this episode, all of this other stuff comes to the surface for me. And it's an episode that I almost can't watch. And if you and I were sitting together watching the episode, like you'd see me sort of freaking out in my chair, and sort of having a moment, you'd be like, what? They're just in the holodeck. It's okay, John. But for me, whenever I hear about that, whenever I see stories like that in the news about people, because this still happens today because we refuse to learn the lessons of history, it's something that really affects me.
Yeah. Oh, my goodness. Not to be light or anything, but you were talking about that of, relocation and deportation and stuff. Like with my background being Mormon and having to move across the U.S. because we were kicked out, and the extermination order in Missouri where it was legal to kill a Mormon. Yeah, you're sort of bringing things up there with that.
Yeah. And, sometimes you can watch an episode and it doesn't trigger.
Right.
Right. You think, it's not a big deal. It's fine. But anytime I see stories like this, it's something that really comes up. And I got to tell you, it really comes up for me worse when I watch Insurrection.
Yeah.
Because it's a much bigger part of the story. And in that case, the Admiral, it's actually malicious.
Yes.
Right. He's like, we are going to extract these people. And it really is a much closer analogy. But I picked this episode because it's the first one chronologically, and it's the first one I had exposure to. And that's why it was a really special episode for me. And Amy, I thank you for taking the time to talk to me about it. Is there anything about it that you wanted to mention that we didn't bring up?
I think the difference between Homeward and Insurrection, I think you hit on, was that intent, that purpose. What was the Admiral's purpose and what was Nikolai's purpose? And for part of the way, the colonists or the people didn't even know that they had left their planet.
Right.
So there's that difference there. Whereas in Insurrection, that was 100% political and selfish. And, so there are slight differences where I can see the Insurrection would be closer and bring those thoughts up. Oh, goodness.
The one part of it that really wrecks me, which I didn't mention, is the part in Homeward when the older Barallan, I think, is talking to Worf, and he says, I may die soon. You should marry my daughter.
Right.
Right. he pretty much says that. There are so many stories of things like that happening where people would just give their babies away to Muslim families and say, just raise my kid because they're going to come for me.
Yeah.
Or, forced conversions, or people just trying to run away or going into hiding, or, all kinds of crazy things. So it's just a little tiny scene, and it just brings up all this stuff that is very much at the forefront of my mind whenever I think about my family history. So, and there's a lot of that stuff that actually happened in history. And that's one of the great things, I think, about Star Trek generally. When it's at its best, it presents you an opportunity to critically question things that tie into the real world. And anytime an episode does that for me, I think that's one of the best episodes for me.
And it's interesting because obviously I did not know any of your background or any of this history, unfortunately. And so when people say, oh, I love this episode, or, it has a great connection, you need to hear their stories, because now Homeward is going to mean so much more to me because of this history lesson and the personal connection that I have with you. And that happens for all of Star Trek, right? I mean, it's always been said, someone's favorite is someone's least favorite. And it's because of those connections and what Star Trek brings and the stories it's telling. And it may tell a story that you have no relation to. Everything in life doesn't happen to you personally, but there are stories out there, and it's just so wonderful that Star Trek can tell these stories and affect so many people. And then when we learn about them, it has so much more meaning. So thank you, John, for sharing.
It was my pleasure. And thank you for coming back on the show. It's I didn't mean to make it a downer for you, but I'm so glad you came back on. And it really was a treat for me to have you back on the show, because the way Trek Profiles is set up, it's not the kind of show you get to come back on and guest again, because that's just not how the format of the show works. So it was a real treat for me to invite you and all the other guests back on the show to turn the tables on me for opposite day on Trek Profiles. So why don't you tell people where they can find you and tell them about your exciting new project?
Well, you can find me over on Trek FM, where I'm co-hosting Earl Grey, and that is about the next generation. I am also on United Federation of Podcasts Network, and the new podcast that I have started with my good friend Patrick Devlin is called All Good Things. And there we are just going to talk about all the good things that Star Trek has to offer. So everything, and I'm very excited to be doing that. You can find me on Twitter at Miss Amy Nelson.
For the listeners out there, I was doing some gentle internet research before our call today with Miss Amy Nelson here. So I was listening to her All Good Things podcast, and it is fantastic. In fact, I was giving her some feedback before we began recording on it. I was giving her a little tweak about something. It was all in good fun. But I would encourage all of you to subscribe and listen to that, and listen to all the other great podcasts that Brandon is producing over there on UFP Earth. It's a great network, and really appreciative of everything you're doing. And I'm really appreciative of you, Amy, as well, and for your friendship and all the fun things we get to do here as the Las Vegas away team.
Because we are local. So thank you. I'm very honored to be invited back and to, just partake in your friendship. So thank you so much.
Amy was such a good sport to come back on the show, and I thank her for coming back on and talking about Homeward with me. If you were interested in what I talked about and you'd like to learn more about the Armenian genocide, I'm going to post a series of links in the show notes up at TrekProfiles.com. So please do check that out if you have an interest and want to learn more. All right, let's move it along to the next segment. In this one, I sit down with my friend Shashank Avaru to talk about a classic TOS episode that I just cannot get enough of. In a way, Shashank was one of the originators of this whole podcast extravaganza idea, since when I interviewed him on episode 23, he kept talking about how he just wanted to be a really good guest on the show since he knew he would only get one crack at it. So it was a great idea, and it really spurred this whole concept of bringing people back on to interview me. So I thank him for that. Okay, let's check it out. M5, play it.
Namaste Homo sapiens, my name is Shashank Avaru. I am a co-host on Polytrex, but more importantly, I would like to think I'm a dear friend of John Krikorian, and I was very lucky to be one of the guests on Trek Profiles. I tried very hard to do my best in that episode, and it's been a while since the episode came out, but outside of Polytrex, it's one of those episodes that whenever I talk to people, somebody will bring up, oh, you were on Trek Profiles. So thanks to your listeners, and thanks to you for having me. It was such a wonderful, delightful episode to be a part of.
I was glad to have you on, Shashank. I think we had a great discussion, and I appreciated your enthusiasm for the subject matter and the material. So it was a great show.
I believe on that episode also, at least 4 or 5 times, I did mention one of my favorite episodes, which I get to talk about with John today. It's Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. It's, I believe, episode 15 of season 3, and it was aired on 10th January 1969. Most people recognize this episode. It's also the episode from which, if I remember correctly, we get John's famous STLV cosplay, do we not?
Yes, you do. Absolutely. As a follower of Lokai.
And there is not really a whole lot of synopsis to discuss in this episode. It's not very plot heavy. It really, the episode drives itself through from a very simple perspective, and then it takes that, and it's a joy to watch how the performances and the relatively simple plot takes us through. But I guess a synopsis would be: the Enterprise encounters 2 duochromatic and mutually belligerent aliens who put the ship in the middle of their old conflict. That's about all. If you've not seen the episode, that's about all I really want to tell you. But it's a fun episode. And I know why I am talking here with you about this. I remember mentioning it on my appearance, and I have talked many times about how much I love this episode. John, why do you think this is such a powerful episode for you? I mean, you cosplay from it, so it's definitely very, very meaningful to you.
It certainly is. And this is one where it's not just a really good episode of Star Trek, and I would probably put it up in the very top tier of all of Star Trek, of all 700 and something hours, but it's also an episode that I think is personally meaningful because I think it's really about something important that people should think about. And when I think of what makes a really good Star Trek burrito, right? What if I was going to make that burrito, it's not enough to have the right ingredients. They have to be in the right proportion. They have to be rolled together in the right way. It has to look pleasing. It has to taste pleasing. You have to enjoy everything about it. And I think that this episode has that. I know that there are some criticisms out there of it, and I don't think there's anything perfect under the sun, so I'll just say that. So I think it has a little bit of action. It has a really profound message, and it has a morality play at the center of it. What is the correct thing to do here? And there's lots of good things where you can sit down and think about what are the ethical implications of what's happening in the show. And the other part of it, too, that I think is really important for me is I always think about these meta elements whenever I watch Star Trek, at least if I'm aware of it. There's some episodes that I don't know much about what went into it, so I just sit there and I watch it, and that's great. But having been involved in watching TOS ever since I was a kid, I've been around enough and heard enough stuff and read enough stuff about things that happened outside the show to really appreciate some of the other elements. And one of the things that's always on my mind as I watch the episode is at the end when you sort of have that preposterous running scene with Beale, and he's sort of doing that ridiculous Frank Gorshin run. And you have the background, the images of the warfare that's happening. Those images all come from World War II. Mm-hmm. Those are combat photography, and those are things that are actually from World War II. And the people who made the show in the 60s had lived through World War II, and many of them had fought, including Gene Roddenberry himself. And so for them to bring some of that and to put it into the episode, I think was it really touched me in a way that they included that in the episode. And I realized it was a production decision because it was, free stuff and they could probably put in the episode without having to pay a lot for it. But also as people who'd been through that experience, to incorporate that into the episode, I think was a really interesting thing. And I really appreciated it. And I just love the ethics of it because I'm very interested in what it means to be a free person. How should we structure society, political economy? These are the kinds of things I nerd out about. And I know that you and Barry often have discussions about this kind of stuff. And so the idea that here's this guy, Lokai, and he's a freedom fighter for his people, but certainly the other side doesn't see it that way. I absolutely loved that. And what's great about it, and I'm just going off on a tear here. I'm sorry, Shashank, but I'll turn it back to you in just a second.
No. This is great. Please. This is what I was hoping to get out of you. So this is great.
But the other part of it, too, is that you have in the show, because it's TV, you have the objective observer. So often history is written by the victors. So if you want a real example of that, if you read all the stories that Julius Caesar wrote about his conquest of the Gauls, it's basically Julius Caesar was great, signed Julius Caesar. That's literally the book. And he writes about himself in the third person, and Caesar went here and did this, and then he went there and he conquered those people, and then he met these incredibly tough Gauls over here, and this tribe was very, very, very tough, and we fought them, and I defeated them, and Caesar defeated them too. He's writing about himself, but he talks about himself in the third person. So you only really have his point of view. And what I liked here is that you have both sides. And while I don't think that Beale's side is necessarily sympathetic, I think it does. It is a little bit more fair in that you can see both sides of the dispute. And so I appreciated that as well. And I really like the message at the heart of it, right? Which is that people are people. And one of the messages I say that's in all Star Trek is humans gonna human. And that's what I think this episode is telling us about by proxy through these people. I don't know if they're actually ever referred to by this name, but like the Sharonese, the two species, or one species that has two distinct different kinds of body markings, I guess. And is that we actually get to see through them this story. And I think it's just wonderful in every way. That was just a whole bunch of stuff. So I don't know. Which part of that do you want to respond to?
Oh, many things. But most importantly, I like that you love the episode so much because it's one of my favorite episodes. And I don't think not just in Star Trek, but in TV in general, the fact that this episode has survived and unfortunately still remains so profound 50 years from when it came out is just really saying something about an episode that in its time was not really celebrated as much as I believe it should have. So a couple of things I wanted to say in there. The footage you were referring to that was superimposed while that run was going on is actually specifically from London, England, when it was burning during World War II. So that's where we got those shots from. And just to set up a bit of context for when the episode came out, it was just a year ago that Martin Luther King had been assassinated. Mm-hmm. And the episode was definitely an allegory to the riots that were taking place at the time. And there was so much going on at the time that this episode was trying to talk about. But I went back and found some old criticisms, and a lot of them say the same thing. They're like, oh, it's too, it's too loud and obvious. It's hitting on the head way too hard, especially with the fact that both Bale and Lokai are black and white. The fact that is happening is just really dumb, for lack of a better term, from a lot of the reviews that I read. I don't know if I agree with that. I think it was necessary at the time for that to happen, and for an episode like that to show what was going on with Star Trek. And I know not everybody is a fan of season 3. People have their problems with it, but I think this is a good episode. Even I think personally, if somebody asked me, hey, from 3 seasons of the original series, if somebody had never seen anything and you wanted to tell them what Star Trek was about, what would you show? I would show them Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Yeah. Because whether they get anything else about any of the other episodes, this is one that really touches on everything that Star Trek is well known for. And there are a few things just about this episode that really stood out to me. I think we brought up a lot of those, but do you have a favorite moment from the episode or a favorite quote?
I think one of the moments that sticks out to me is the entire self-destruct scene, and just how preposterous it is when you think about it, that the captain is willing, and I believe he was willing, right? He was willing to go all the way to say, look, I am going to blow up the ship and kill us all if you don't respect our procedures and allow us to do the things we have to do to save those people on planet Arianis, I think it is. And there's all this incredible tension, and there's weird camera angles on the mouth as they're giving the codes. And I just remembered as a kid watching the episode and being like on the edge of my seat. And this is after like the 5th or 6th or 8th time I'd seen it. You know, I was still touched by not touched, but I was still swept up in how tense it was. And I think anytime you can do that in a TV entertainment or a movie, I think that's wonderful. And I think that that's one of the things they did in this show. But I do want to mention one other thing, right? So here's a thing I think we could actually maybe go back. If we could go back in time and change one thing, maybe they shouldn't have been black and white. Maybe they should have been chartreuse and mauve or something. But if you just kept the episode exactly the same and not made them black and white and maybe made them, two other colors, two different pastels or something, I think it would have been just fine.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because from what I've read about the history of this episode, the original story concept did actually not depict them in black and white.
Right.
They were actually going to be, one of them was going to be the devil and the other one was going to be an angel. But just before the episode was going to be shot, the director, Judd Taylor, decided that they were going to be black and white. That was his original suggestion anyway, but it just got passed over. And since he got control of the episode when they were shooting, he changed it almost at the last minute for them to be half black and half white.
Well, I thought it was just great, so I don't have any problems with it. I think it was wonderful as it was, but it's sort of I would categorize it as an EBI, even better if. It would have been even better if maybe they hadn't done black and white, maybe two other colors. But I think that's just a sort of a mental footnote. I don't think that really affects the episode in any significant way. But what you're talking about is that the things that were going on during the time of the episode, right now as we record this, Shashank, in 2019, people are really wrapped around the axle about stuff that's going on. And when I look at, like, in 1968, we had, as you had indicated, we had MLK had been assassinated, RFK had been assassinated, the Chicago Democratic Convention, we had a mayor arresting people for protesting at a convention, at the Democratic Convention. I mean, there was absolute chaos in the streets of Chicago. There were race riots in Detroit. I mean, there was serious stuff going on, and I think we were at a much lower point then than we are now. And they put this episode on to say, nope, we should all be together, and we should all be hanging out together, and we're better together, and it'll be great someday when we are, and when we all realize it. And I thought, man, oh man, that is like 7 standard deviations away from where I think the populace was at the time. And that's what I think made it so brave, which is why one of the things I will say to people when the topic of TOS comes up and why I'm a fan of it is I will say that given where society was at the time of the show, I think that they went further and went much further afield and took bigger risks than any other Trek had ever since. And that includes right up to today, to 2019. I don't think anybody has pushed it as far as they did. And with stuff like this, I think it's just a great example of that. And that's why, another reason why I always love it.
Well, John, it was a definite, wonderful, huge pleasure talking to you again and being on Trek Profiles again. I appreciate you having me back.
Make sure that you tell everyone where they can find you, Shashank.
People can find me on @Gutted_hero on Twitter, and you can listen to my podcast that I do with Barry DeFord on POLITREKS on Twitter. We are Polytreks. We do it under the Trek Geeks banner. We discuss politics and culture in Star Trek. We take something from Star Trek and then we take something from the real world and we try to put them together and hopefully make some sense out of it. That's what we do on that show.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Thank you. This is John's comic book guy friend, Shashank Avaru, signing off.
You should definitely subscribe to Shashank's Polytreks podcast. Every time I talk to him, we have such a good time, and I knew he would be the right person to talk to about Let That Be Your Last Battlefield. Well, that's going to do it for part 2. Like I said, we'll have a Kobayashi Maru test for you on the part 3 of this. And before I leave you, I really just wanted to say... M5, are you kidding me with this?
Incoming message.
Okay. Who's it from?
Muhammad Noor, guest from episode 19.
Oh, that's wonderful. Professor Noor was a great guest, and I really enjoyed his book, too. Let's hear it.
Hi there, this is Muhammad Noor, a professor at Duke University and a former guest on this podcast. I'm calling in to offer a big congratulations to John on the 2-year anniversary of his wonderful podcast, Trek Profiles. Now, I have to say, I love both the idea and the execution of this podcast. First, in terms of the idea, Trek fans are just wonderfully diverse and wonderfully interesting. And I love that some of the people even being interviewed by John on this podcast are even other podcasters who have their own shows going, like Andrew Heaton and Jen Tift, who both also spoke on the podcast in 2019. Now, from my experience, the execution is phenomenal too. There's a very, very thorough advanced discussion to get, everybody on board in terms of which episodes we're going to discuss, what episodes we're watching, what's our favorite series, what's our favorite captain, what's our favorite alien, all those things. I love that there's so much homework done ahead of time so I can prepare and John comes in just ready to go. And then there's throughout the whole thing, really, really thoughtful questions and engaging dialogue, but it's not at all stilted because it's not like we rehearsed it. We just talked about what we will discuss. So each of us comes in prepared and ready, and it's great. And I see that with all of the other podcast interviews I've heard on this podcast. So it's fantastic. And this last point may seem kind of minor, but I think it's huge. I love that there's detailed outlines on the webpage about what was covered. Given that this is one of the longer podcasts out there, it's not like just 10-minute episodes. It's really great having a sense of where things are going. So if I want to jump ahead, if I want to jump back, I can find where specific things are. So congratulations on this 2-year anniversary. And again, thank you for having me on the podcast back in 2019. I really loved it. I will say the future is bright for this podcast, given all the new Trek series coming out. We have Discovery going into season 3. And I'll add, for anyone who hasn't watched it, I think it's great. We have Picard just starting up. Lower Decks is just around the corner. And there's various other series in various stages of development. So personally, I grew up with Trek. I watched the original series when it was young. I watched Next Generation in high school as it was airing, and then the other series as they came out. And with all these new series coming out, I just imagine there's going to be a huge, wonderful next generation of fans coming about with them, both young and old. People who are maybe engaging with them the first time, even though they are older, or, maybe people just continuing their love for Trek. So the future is bright, and I'm excited to see what this podcast has to bring in year 3. Thank you again for a wonderful podcast. Thank you for having me, and happy 2020.
I'm so glad Professor Noor likes my show notes. I do give a pretty good rundown of everything that's on each episode, and I post a lot of other links there too. So go ahead and check that out if you have an interest. But, ladies and gentlemen, you know what that music means. So here ends this installment of the Trek Profiles podcast. This is part 2 of 3 in my podcasting extravaganza, so more to come shortly. I'd like to thank my special guest hosts, Dan Davidson, Ali Martinez, Amy Nelson, and Shashanka Varu. And also my thanks to Andrew Heaton, Annika Dane, and Professor Mohammed Noor for their messages of Trek love. But before we offer a Trek quote to close this episode, I'd like to remind you that you may send us your Podiversary congratulations, your entreaties for me to stop podcasting, or your homemade mixtapes of denubulant poetry to feedback@trekprofiles.com, or on Facebook or Twitter @TrekProfiles. Anything you send us may be used in the show, or it may be flung into a transwarp conduit without chronoton shielding. This week, I leave you with a quote from It's Only a Paper Moon when Vic Fontaine says, quote, "Look, kid, I don't know what's going to happen to you out there. All I can tell you is that you've got to play the cards life deals you. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, but at least you're in the game." Close quote. Thanks for listening, and live long and prosper.
This handcrafted podcast is brought to you by Stars and Sky Media Lab. It's cosmic.
That was great, man. You know what we forgot to say?
What?
They mind melded at the end.
Yes.
And it reminded me of the Sarek Picard moment in the Spock episode.
I totally forgotten that. Yeah. I totally forgotten that. See, now because you just read it, see, you're more up on it than I am. So you're making me look bad. That's my show.
No, not possible, my friend. Not possible.
I will say this, man. That whole thing with my dad, that was traumatic, man.
That's and it's New York.
Yeah,
you had a good New York accent when you did that. That was pretty good. You threw that he had like a kind of little accent to it. I don't think a lot of the youngs would get the reference, but my dad was a little bit like Archie Bunker. Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. And so, like, the idea that he would have this nerdy kid, you know, like he just couldn't get his brain wrapped around it, you know? And so it's like, or one time I asked him for $20 and he gave me $20 and I went out and I went to the hobby store or the bookstore and I came back with a bunch of Star Trek books. And he's like, it might have been this book. It might have been Yesterday's Sun. And he's like, what the hell did you do with the $20 I gave you? And I was like, I bought books. He goes, who the hell buys books? Books are free at the library. Who the hell does that? You know? And I was like, but Dad, I love this. I mean, he's like, what the hell? I don't understand what's going on here. You did something with that money and you don't want to tell me. I mean, it was literally, and I was like, well, I have the receipt. He's like, don't hand me that. And like, he was not interested in, like, you know, me showing him that I'd spent the $20 on the books. He was just like, refused to believe it.
Oh my God, that's funny.
He was a special character. And you know what, though? He was a great guy. Everybody loved him. Yeah. But he was hard on me. Yeah. But if you had met him, you'd love him. Everybody did. He was the life of the party.
I think, didn't you post a picture recently? You guys looked exactly alike, if I remember. Did you post a picture recently?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I think I posted his army picture.
Yes.
Or something like that. But he, you know, I'll tell you how different of a generation he was. Is he was in the hospital when I came out here in 99. Mm-hmm. So my parents had moved out here in 96 out to Vegas and retired. Okay. And I'd come out to visit on holidays and, you know, all that. I was living in New Hampshire and in Maine at the time. And so he got sick in February 99 and I came out and he's in the hospital. So I'm visiting with him. And anyway, I was thinking, you know, I wonder if I can get a job out here. So I said to my dad, Dad, maybe since I'm out here, you know, maybe I'll just see if I can write up a resume and go for a job. He's like, no one would hire anybody who would quit a job. Nobody hires quitters. And I was like, Dad, that's not how it works. He's like, I said, Dad, you don't understand? He goes, no, you don't understand. No one would hire a quitter. And I was like, oh my God, you know, like how do I, you know, because he had two jobs in his life. He was in the Army. He was in a grocery store. He retired. He actually got a gold watch. I mean, it is literally that. So he was very much, and he retired in like 1983, 82. Wow. Yeah, so he was retired before I was even in high school, you know, because like I said, they were much older than me. Yep. My mom was often mistaken for the grandmom.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Because there were all these like, you know, 20-something, 30-something moms. My mom was 46, 47 when I was born. Huh. So, yeah, it was just a very different experience. Yep. And my dad, who was a character, you know, and we got along all right, but especially when I got older, but when I was a kid, man, he just could not get his brain wrapped around me. And
that's funny.
Reading this book, I'll tell you, it really helped me. It really did.
That's good. I think that's such a great thing about Star Trek is that it when it doesn't mean to, it can help people in so many ways, and when it's not even trying to.
Yeah.
That's one of the things I like so much about it.
I know. It triggers these things in you.
Speaking of things that are good, what'd you think about episode 1?
Oh, dude. I had to turn it off because 10 Forward was in the wrong location. And then I burned my TV. And then I called up CBS All Access. And I was like, what the are you doing? You obviously hate Star Trek. So, and then I went to my Star Trek collection, put it all in a big dumpster and set it on fire because everybody, right?
You're Doomcock, aren't you?
Sorry, I just wanted to see how far I could take that, you know?
I am just so...
it was the best thing. It really was.
It was so amazing. Oh my God, this show has the potential to blow everything away. Everything. And I've seen the next 2, and I'm telling you, it's believable.
I don't want to know anything, but I mean, I mean, it's already evident that it's a very special thing that we're watching here. And, I just love, you know what I just loved about it? This is going to sound a little weird, especially because it's not really a major element, but I just loved how beautifully real it appeared on the screen, you know, just the chateau, and when they go to the academy, the Daystrom Institute and whatever. I mean, it just, you know, because they never really had TNG and all 90s Trek looked very flat.
Yes.
You know, it's just how they filmed it and how they did TV. It just, even the stuff they did outside was flat, you know, it just looked
gorgeous.
You know, this was just so real and just so human, you know.
They've got so many elements that, for example, the Resican flute in the music. Yeah. It's not a Resican flute, but it's a callback. Supposed to be.
It's a reference,
It's just beautiful reference, and the nostalgia is there. It's not too much. It's just enough to really pull at your heartstrings. And I am just so happy about what it has been like so far. I said to Sue, we watched it the other night with my sister and brother-in-law, and I think it's the best premiere that there has been. I think it's better than any of the premieres. And Sue surprised me and said, I think Discovery's premiere was better. And I think because of the action aspect of it, maybe because like one of the things I've heard some people kind of say, well, this one was kind of a slow first episode, and I think it's perfect that it was slow. It was able to really get all the elements lined up about what this was going to be like, and then there was the explosion at the end with Daj and everything, but to me, it was perfect. It was just so well done.
Did you see the thing I put on Twitter about the one thing that made me gasp out loud? I don't know if you saw this.
I did see it, but I don't remember what it was.
And Amy Nelson was over here. We had a whole watch party at my house. Yeah. So I have witnesses. The only thing where I actually gasped out loud was Earl Grey hot decaf. I was like.
I'll tell you what. When we were at the ArcLight with everybody there, everybody was laughing when that scene happened. They all started laughing. And I'll tell you one thing though. I love the 2 Romulans that live at his chateau.
Oh, they're fantastic. Now, did you read the Countdown comics?
What's that?
Did you read the Countdown comics?
Yes.
So, I mean, because that's the story there, you know?
People were bitching about, these aren't acting like Vulcans. And it's like,
they're not.
Just don't get it, people.
They're not Vulcans, you know?
I try to find those little, like, connections, like anything that I can. But I guess... Sorry,
you want to hear about a really weird connection, if I can divert for just a second?
Oh, no, I want to hear.
This is really weird. As I always do on Trek Profiles, whenever I'm going to talk about an episode with a guest, and especially because this is an episode I picked, I always look at the Memory Alpha page and do a little research just to get up to speed on things and to learn a little bit more so I can hopefully have a good conversation about it. And the air date for this episode was December 30th, 1999. So this was right at the end of the 90s. And it's really funny because as we record this, just a couple days ago, I was telling a story on Twitter about where I was December 31st, 1999, and what I was doing.
What?
And when people listen to this, they can, if I haven't automatically deleted it, because I delete all my tweets get automatically deleted, but if it's not gone by then, you can go back and look, and you can see I was camping out in the Mojave Desert next to this phone booth that was in the middle of the desert. And that's where I had New Year's Eve, 1999 to 2000. So that's where I was when this episode was on the air, which is really weird because I had no idea about when the air date was, and that I was just talking about this. And I was actually posting pictures. Some people on Twitter were saying, "Oh, you got pictures of this?" And I was like, "I think so. I have to find them." And I was posting those pictures, and then we're here recording this, and I look, and there it was, right? So this episode was coming out right as I was camping out at the Mojave Desert phone booth, answering calls from around the world from random weirdos.
Wow, who would have thought?
It was just this weird thing that happened, and I just thought it was really funny. Sorry.
Oh, no, there's these like random connections sometimes that you think about. I always remember, like, people mention dates and stuff, and I mean, I still remember way back when, like, when I watched certain Star Trek episodes, what I was doing or, like, what the weather was outside that day, just because you correlate it. It's, like, really fascinating.
I remember watching Encounter at Farpoint when it was on the air for the first time from TNG. Go. I knew exactly where I was. I knew exactly what was going on, and I knew I was going to call my friend immediately after, and we were going to talk about it, and it was all planned out.
I can remember when my family watched the premiere of Broken Bow on Enterprise, we ate spaghetti for dinner that day. I remember that. That was so long ago. I would have been like 6 years old, and I remember that. It's insane.
That's amazing. and probably there's a song, too, that will bring you back to it, right?
Yeah.
Like we were talking about before.
I'm like, oh, gotta have that spaghetti now.
So if I play Faith of the Heart, you're going to have to have your SpaghettiOs immediately after. And getting you back on. So I'm glad you agreed to be on.
Anything for you. I had such a fun time the first time around. You really asked questions that made me think outside the box. Because you get asked those like normal Trek questions that you're like, oh yeah, what's your favorite series and what's your favorite character? But you like really made me scratch my head on some of that stuff. So now I was like super excited to make you think about some of these questions.
It's opposite day here on Trek Profiles, right? I'm sorry.
Gosh, John!
I was debating whether or not I should give you some warning about this, and I was,
a little warning would have been nice because I would have never in a million years.
No, I mean, well, it's not I said it on the show, right? It's not the kind of thing you would know. It's it's just the kind of stuff that's in my head, right? But what kills me is a lot of people don't know this story.